once had 2 job interviews in North Carolina. I lived in New York at the time. I was taking the drive down there instead of flying to save money. My at-the-time job sucked, and the 2 jobs I was interviewing for could finally be a new start for me. They were corporate office jobs with a lot of benefits and good salaries. Plus, the weather would be much better than New York. I was driving down there on a Thursday night. I took off from work Friday because that's when the 2 interviews were. Since I had to work Thursday, I had to hit the road as soon as I was off work. I stopped home first to grab my suitcase and other stuff I was bringing. Then I said goodbye to my family and set off. It was a long 8+ hour drive ahead of me. My ETA was into the early hours of the morning, like 2 a.m. I was heading to a Comfort Inn. I drank like 3 cups of coffee my first few hours driving, and for a while I was good. But if you're already running on fumes, no amount of coffee is going to keep you going. I already didn't get much sleep the night before because I was stressing over these interviews, and after a long, busy day at work, the last thing I wanted to be doing was driving close to 9 hours. It was late at night now. I had about 2 hours left in the drive. There were very few other cars on the road this late at night on a weeknight. I was starting to feel really sleepy now, but I knew most of the drive was behind me. Suddenly, on the side of the highway, I saw a man in a suit standing there, not walking, not moving. He was facing my car, and as I looked at him as I passed, I saw his face turning to follow my car. I said out loud, "What the fuck?" It was truly bizarre. I almost contemplated turning around and asking if he needed a ride. He was just in the middle of the highway in a suit at like 12:30 at night. I came up with stories in my head about what may have happened, like maybe his girlfriend kicked him out of the car. I did this to keep my mind awake as I felt like I was drifting away. Then something beyond frightening happened. It was only maybe 10 minutes after I had seen that man that I saw another man on the side of the road coming up, also in a suit, also just standing there. What the hell was going on? I slowed down to pull to the side of the road and possibly ask if everything was okay, and maybe offer a ride. I don't know what I was thinking, but either way, when I was on the shoulder almost to a stop, I looked in the rearview mirror and then turned around completely, and that man was gone, as if he just disappeared. I stepped on the gas and got back on the road. I was losing it. I needed to stop for another coffee. I had about an hour and a half to go at this point. I stopped at the first pit stop I could find and bought a medium coffee. I drank a few sips, but as I was sitting in the rest area gas station parking lot, I spotted a man in a suit again, standing under a light post. It was the same man. This time I got a clearer view of his face. He looked like a middle-aged white man, short dark brown hair, clean-shaven, and a neutral expression. But it was the way he was once again facing my car that freaked me the fuck out. I turned the car on and got out of there without looking back. I wanted to complete this drive, but the coffee wasn't doing it. I felt like I was going to pass out behind the wheel. I wasn't going to make it, so I pulled off the highway and parked in a random parking lot. I angled the seat all the way down and I attempted to go to sleep. As tired as I was, I couldn't help but be scared in this empty parking lot. Scared that if I opened my eyes, I would see that man in the suit again. I was drifting into a sleep when something made me wake up again and open my eyes. Probably my mind playing tricks on me again. I looked around the outside of my car, scared I was going to see him. I looked out each window and then the front windshield, and it was clear. Then I looked in the rearview mirror, and I felt my soul leave my body for a second, because there I saw for a second a person in the back seat. I'm sure it was the man in the suit again, but I didn't look long enough because I opened the door, screamed, and fell backwards out of the car as I crawled back. I kept screaming until I finally got up, looked inside the car, and saw nobody. The back seat was empty. As I came to my senses, I realized my mind had been playing tricks on me all night. There is no man in a suit. I'm just completely exhausted and need to sleep. I got back in my car, my heart racing. Honestly now though, I was too awake to go to sleep. I turned the car back on and finished my coffee and banged out the rest of the drive. By the time I checked into the hotel and got to the room, I fell into the bed and passed out right away. The next day, my first interview was at 11 a.m., so I didn't get much sleep, but but I definitely felt somewhat recharged. However, the second my interviewer walked out to greet me, I froze up. My interviewer looked identical to the image of that man in the suit I kept hallucinating the night before. I know the interviewer noticed me freeze up. I could see it in his face. I tried to recover from this, but it set the tone for the rest of the interview, and I was completely nervous and out of it. I felt like I were in a dream. I left that interview with only an hour to get ready for my next one, and my next interviewer was a woman. I did much better with this one, because I actually got the job. I still work here and live in North Carolina now. My old therapist told me that she thinks the stress of mentally preparing for the interviews mixed with the lack of sleep caused me to hallucinate the main cause of my fear and stress. And so I hallucinated a man in a suit because that's who I pictured would be interviewing me. I feel like it doesn't sound too far-fetched, but it doesn't change how downright horrific the whole ordeal was. I was driving in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania one night to avoid traffic getting home. It was probably a little past midnight at this point, and the road was basically deserted, just the way I like it. I was listening to my usual podcast on the radio when a ding came from my car, alerting me that I was low on fuel. I put a pit stop into my Maps app for the nearest gas station, which was a little ways up the secluded road. About 5 minutes later, I pulled into the gas station on the right, the only parking lot for miles, as this road was basically nothing but woods on each side. The gas station was some generic, no-name gas station. I pulled next to the pump and noticed a man filling up the tank of his old beater pickup truck. He was looking at me as I walked past him and into the shop. Inside the shop, I bought a coffee and paid cash for my gas. When I came back outside, I noticed the man at the pump getting into his pickup truck, then driving away. After a couple of minutes of filling up the tank, I got back in my car and continued my drive. But not even a minute after leaving the station, I noticed on the side of the road on the grass was that same pickup truck from the gas station. It was just sitting next to the woods, turned off. Interesting. I kept driving, looking in my rearview mirror to see if it would turn on. Nope. I turned my podcast back on and continued my drive. A few minutes passed though, and I heard another ding come from my car. My dashboard screen showed that one of my tires was very low. I slowed down and started hearing a wobbling sound. I opened a window and knew right away I had a flat tire. I pulled to the side of the road and went to investigate. It was my rear driver's side tire. It was flat. I didn't think I hit anything. I would have felt it. The thought came to my head, what if that guy at the gas station slashed it? I took out my phone and was looking up the number for my roadside assistance company on Google. I heard the sound of a car or truck engine a little down the road behind me, but oddly I didn't see any headlights. It was just pitch black down there. Then the sound of the engine suddenly stopped, and it was quiet again. I went to my trunk to grab the SOS flashlight out of my toolbox my dad gave me one year as a Christmas present. I grabbed the long light rod, turned it on, and aimed it down the road. I saw the reflection of a truck's headlights, pulled on the side of the road about 200 feet away. It looked like that pickup truck again. I gasped and ran into the woods and ducked behind a big bush and tree. I took out my phone and called 911. I heard the sound of the truck down the road starting, and this time the headlights were on. I heard and saw through the bush the truck pull up next to my car, and then after a short moment of silence, a man yelled out, "You need some help?" I knew better than to answer. 911 picked up, and I whispered into the phone my location, and that someone slashed my tire, and that I think the person who did it was right here following me. The lady asked a bunch of standard questions, asking me to describe the man and his truck. I heard the truck door open and close. I told the lady over the phone that the man got out of his truck. She told me to remain hidden in the woods if I thought he was a threat. She asked if I could see if he was armed, and that's when the call disconnected. I had shitty cell reception here. I waited, hoping she would call me back. I'm sure she was trying to, but it wouldn't go through. I heard the sound of another passing car on the road. It was slowing down. Then I heard talking. It was the voice of another man. I crept closer to the edge of the woods to get a view of the road. I saw the man from the pickup truck standing next to this other stopped pickup truck in the middle of the road. He was talking to a person in the truck. I overheard the creepy man coming up with this fake explanation as to what was going on here. At that moment, I rushed into the road yelling, "Help, I don't know him." Both the man in the truck and the man who followed me looked over to me. I said to the man in the truck that this man slashed my tire and followed me here. The man in the truck's reaction was to look at the man with a disturbed look. The creepy man denied having done anything to my tires and claimed he's never seen me ever. At the same time, he hurried away to his pickup truck and started backing up until he cleared both of our vehicles, then drove off. The man in the other pickup truck got out and examined my flat, then offered me a ride into town. I told him I had police officers on the way, and sure enough, within a few minutes, a cop car with its lights on pulled up beside us. The man vouched for me when I told him about the other man. The police officer said he'd go down to the gas station and request to see the camera footage to see if it caught the pickup driver actually slashing my tire. The officer took my info, and he waited with me while I waited for the roadside assistance company. The tow truck driver gave me a ride to a shop where my dad picked me up. I never heard from that police officer, so I guess he didn't see anything in that video footage. It's scary how close I was to probably being abducted, though. It was the most horrific, haunting night of my life. It still sends shivers down my spine. I'm 28 years old, and my boyfriend Todd lives in a different state from me. We take turns visiting each other for the most part, but I'll usually end up visiting him more often because he has his own place, and I still live with my sister as a roommate. I was going up there for a week because it was winter break, and I had off because I'm a teacher, so I packed a lot. I was taking up there my crappy '09 Hyundai Sonata that I bought for my sister. Up where Todd lives, there was snow on the ground at this point, so the more north I got, the more careful I had to be driving, as that car was not really built for driving in the snow. It was on the later side, and unfortunately, it was starting to snow really hard now. There were blizzard warnings earlier, but both Todd and I agreed it would be better to try and beat the blizzard tonight rather than come tomorrow when the roads are full of snow. I started to accept the fact that I'd need to stay somewhere for the night, as I was still too far away, and the roads were getting bad. After stopping for a quick sandwich and some coffee at a small diner, the waitress who I was conversing with told me there's no way I should be on the roads right now. She recommended a few hotels and motels in the area. Then, after she walked away and I was left alone to finish up eating, a guy sitting at the bar spun in his chair and said to me there's a motel right up the road from here. When I put the motel's name into my phone, it said it was literally 5 minutes away. He said it was nice and cheap too, so I could just get a quick night's rest and get back on the road tomorrow. He really seemed to overhear my whole conversation with the waitress. He was also just sitting there at the bar with a beer. I'd never seen a person go to a diner just to drink. I didn't even know diners really served alcohol. But people up by Todd are a little weird. To me at least, because I grew up in the city. The man introduced himself as Toby, and I gave him a fake name saying I was Michelle. The rest of my time there, Toby was half facing me in his spinning bar stool, and I wasn't really looking to keep talking to him. So I looked away out the window to the snow until the waitress gave me my check. Then I said goodbye to them both as I left. In that half hour I spent in the diner, the snow accumulated at least an inch. I needed to get to that motel ASAP. I drove slow and was at the motel in a few minutes, maybe 10. There were a couple cars in the lot. It looked like a cheap motel, which was all I needed. I didn't want to waste money anyway. I went to the front desk and asked for a room for a night. I think I paid around $50, and the man at the desk handed me a key to one of the downstairs rooms. I walked back outside to my car to get my stuff and bring it inside. It was a tiny little room with tacky wallpaper, a queen-sized bed, and a red carpet. It was fine for the night. I tried to FaceTime Todd, but there was no reception at all here. The motel had Wi-Fi, but the password was probably at the front desk. So I put my shoes back on and hurried outside through the cold snow to the front desk. On my way there, I noticed there was a new car in the parking lot. I saw someone sitting inside of it, but I didn't take the time to look at who it could have been because realistically, who does that? The man at the front desk emotionlessly pointed to the free Wi-Fi sign with the password, and I typed it in. It took a minute, but I was connected. I went back to my room in a hurry, locked the door, and FaceTimed Todd. Even with Wi-Fi, the connection was so shitty. I could see his face, but it would freeze frame for like 5 seconds, and his voice would cut as well. I was able to at least communicate with him that I was safe in the motel. We decided to just text instead because the FaceTime wasn't really working. We were texting back and forth for a few minutes. Then I heard something come from the bathroom. I leaned forward and saw that the bathroom door was shut. Was it shut before? I didn't remember. I texted Todd that I heard something in the bathroom, and I started freaking out because I realized I ran to the front desk without locking the motel room door. He asked if the door locks by itself. I said, I don't think so, but now I also don't remember if I left the door cracked open or not. He told me to get up and check the door to see if it locks by itself when it closes, and to bring the key with me. I got up, put my shoes on, and saw that the door had a traditional twisting lock that moved with the knob from the inside or the key on the outside. I opened the door, looking to confirm this, but I noticed instantly the extra set of footprints leading to my door. These footprints led from that car that I saw someone sitting in to my door, and nobody was in that car anymore. I felt like screaming, but instead I closed the door to my room and ran to the front desk. I cried to the man that there's an intruder in my room. The front desk worker was not some huge jacked dude, so I don't think he was wanting to go confronting someone. He told me to wait in here, and he called someone. I thought he was calling the police, but instead he started speaking in some other language. I think he was calling a friend or associate. He hung up and told me again to just sit tight in here with him. I was standing in a position where I could see out the glass down to my room, and I let out a shriek when I saw the door to my room open and that man Toby from the diner walking to his car. We locked eyes for a second before he got in his car and backed out onto the unplowed roads, disappearing slowly down the road. The front desk worker's associate or friend or whoever it was arrived a while later. He was this big guy who didn't speak English. I don't know what they were saying to each other, but the front desk worker told me he would give me a different room free of charge to make me feel better. I didn't feel better, but I didn't have any other options of places to stay at this point. I took the new key, and the two men helped me move my stuff into the new room. Todd offered to come here, but I told him not to. It would be too long and too dangerous to drive in the dark and the snow. The next morning, the streets were somewhat plowed, enough to get through the rest of the drive to Todd's. Looking back, I don't like how that motel worker probably didn't call the cops because he didn't want his motel to get any negative attention. I called that diner to warn them about that man. I have no trust in strangers anymore. Not after this. I unfortunately had to move back with my family after my most recent breakup. He and I were living in Boston together in an apartment we got. Just a little word of advice: never sign a lease with someone who you recently got into a relationship with. He was not the person I thought he was. My parents live in western Massachusetts. If you've ever been to Massachusetts, you'd know the more west you get, typically the more rural it gets. I'm not a big country girl. I like to be in or near a major city, especially since I'm in my 20s still. My parents' area is super boring. I'm hoping I'm only here temporarily until I find another apartment I can afford myself, though I'll be staying away from Boston for reasons. I had to get a job back at the urgent care facility I used to work at before I moved. They welcomed me back excitedly, even if it is just temporarily until I move again. The trade-off with this job, though, is that I tend to work undesirable hours, meaning overnights. Though the shifts are easy, they're boring, and they entirely mess up my sleep schedule and social life. Not that social life is even the best around here. After my shifts, sometimes I'll stop for what's considered my dinner, usually takeout since not much is open at these hours. Though this morning, I got out at 4 a.m., and there's a bagel place that opens at that time, and they serve a lot of types of food. So I stopped by there and grabbed a chicken sandwich and a salad. I was going to eat it once I got home. I also had to make a pit stop for gas as well. I stopped at the local Shell station, one of the few gas stations open at this hour that was on the way home. The parking lot for this station is huge, and yet I hardly ever see any other cars in there, even during the day. I went inside to pay cash to save a little money. I went back outside to the pump, and there was now another car at one of the other pumps. It was a blue sedan. A guy got out of the car as I was walking over to the pump I was at. As I began fueling, I noticed him start to fuel up as well. I guess he locked the handle in place so that it would automatically keep dispensing gas without him holding it, because he walked through the 2 pumps to my side and then said to me, "Want to see a funny trick?" I immediately hated this interaction. Still, for some reason, I said, "What's the trick?" He then started doing that stupid old trick where you pretend you're pulling your finger off with your other hand by just folding it down. He kept looking down at his hands and then back at me with this kind of sarcastic looking expression, as if he knew what he was doing was stupid, but honestly I couldn't tell. I fake laughed so that he'd go away, but he didn't stop. He kept doing the trick even after I looked away and tried my best to pretend not to notice anymore. When I felt the click of the gas nozzle indicating that the tank was full, I was so relieved. I quickly relatched the nozzle to the pump and hurried inside for my change. When I came back outside, the man wasn't in sight anymore, yet his car was still there, and the hose was still pumping gas into his car. I didn't want to stick around to catch his attention again. I got back in my car, though just out of paranoia, I checked the back seats just to make sure he wasn't hiding back there. I locked the doors, and then I was back on the road. I was home in about 5 minutes after that. I was so excited to eat my 4:30 a.m. dinner. I picked up the spare from my parents' hiding spot, unlocked the door, and then quickly hid it back in its hiding spot. I locked the door once I entered, as I always do. I went straight to the kitchen to eat. I make sure to be quiet when I get home late so as not to wake up my parents. We only have 2 cars in the family, so I share my mom's car. I didn't need a car in Boston anyway, but since I moved back, I had just been using the hidden spare key they would hide in the front to let myself in. As I was at the table eating, I heard the front door being unlocked and then opening and closing. I stopped chewing and froze to listen. With a mouth full of food, I said, "Mom? Dad?" No answer. I didn't hear any footsteps or anything. I hurried out of the kitchen to take a peek in the foyer. No one was in there. I felt like my heart was in my throat. I ran up the stairs to my parents' room and barged in. I was horrified to see both my parents in bed, and they were both awoken to my very forceful opening of the door. I said very quietly but in a clear panic that someone just came inside the house. My dad jumped out of bed and hurried downstairs. I cautiously followed behind him. He turned on all the lights of every room we passed, then he went out front to check for the spare key, and it was missing. My mom and I were absolutely horrified, yet my mom still found the time to lecture me for not checking my surroundings before re-hiding the key. My dad began searching every room in the house, and we followed. When he was done checking my older brother's room, he left to continue searching and left the lights on in here. I stayed behind in this room and decided to check a couple of the spots that I felt my dad had missed, because I know internally I didn't expect to find anyone. I checked under the bed, and then I checked the closets. Nothing. So I went downstairs to the main floor. It seemed my dad was already checking the basement. I was honestly horrified to go into the basement right now, even with my dad down there, so I stayed on the middle floor with my mom. But curiosity still got me, and I went to the dining room, which is adjacent to the foyer by the front door. I got down on my knees and looked under the table, and there he was. It truly did not feel real. There was that man from the gas station, hiding under the dining room table. I recognized him instantly. I screamed as loud as I could, and in response, my mom started to scream too. My 65-year-old dad came up the stairs as fast as he could, ready to fight this intruder. The man came out from under the table and began fending off my dad, who is at least 20 years his senior, and as my mom and I saw him overpowering my dad, we began doing whatever we could as well, hitting and punching at the man as my dad still held on to him. It was when all 3 of us were attacking him that he finally decided to retreat and fled through the front door. This was when we called the cops, and thank God for a quick response time. However, that man still had the key to the front door. That night, the police left a police car parked in our driveway to deter that man from coming back. My dad wedged a chair in front of the front door as well and slept in the living room. The next day, he switched out the lock to the front door, and with that, my parents' days of hiding a key outside were over. I do feel guilty for bringing that dangerous man to my parents' house, and it was definitely on me for being careless. But honestly, I think that man followed me with his headlights off, because I didn't see any cars behind me the entire ride home. I'm happy for my and my family's safety though. However, this just made me want to move out of here even more. I like driving at night because there's nothing more that I hate than driving in traffic. I'm from New York, Long Island specifically, and the traffic here is truly unbearable. My brother lives in Florida, and I like to go down and visit pretty often. It's a long drive though. Depending on when you leave, it could be upwards of 18 hours. I like to leave New York very early in the morning, like 2 a.m., so that I could be out of all the high traffic areas by the time any cars are on the road. So it was a Thursday morning at 2 a.m. that I was leaving home to get on the road. I stopped for my morning coffee at Dunkin' Donuts, knowing I had a long, grueling drive ahead of me. The reason I was driving and not flying was because I was going to be down there for a whole month, and I didn't want to rely on my brother to take me everywhere I needed to go. By the time I was off of Long Island, it was after 3 a.m. It was smooth sailing from Jersey. The drive from New York to Florida is very easy once you're out of New York. You take the I-95 all the way down. At about 4 a.m., the hunger was starting to set in, and so I pulled off the I-95 at the first sight of a food sign. I saw Wendy's on the sign, and so I figured I'd get breakfast from there. I skipped breakfast at the house because waking up so early, I feel like your brain doesn't have a chance to realize how hungry you are for a few hours. At least that's me personally. I followed the signs to the Wendy's. I was in some random spot in Jersey. There were no streetlights here. I felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. Just about the only light was from my headlights. When I got to the Wendy's parking lot, some of the lights were on, and I saw a car in the parking lot, so I pulled into the drive-thru. The menu in the drive-thru was lit up, so I thought it was open, but I sat there for over a minute looking at the intercom, waiting for someone to greet me, but they didn't. I even said "excuse me" to no avail. I pulled out my phone and looked up this Wendy's, and wouldn't you know it, it didn't open until 6 a.m. And then, suddenly, 3 knocks at my window almost sent me out of my seat. I turned to my right, and there was a man outside my window, smiling. He motioned for me to lower the window. I didn't really feel comfortable doing that, so I just cracked it open just enough to hear him. He said the place isn't open, and I said, yeah, I actually just found that out. He then told me that he was stranded. He pointed to the one other car in the parking lot over there, and said his battery died. He practically begged me to come help him jumpstart his car. I told him I don't have jumper cables, and he told me not to worry, he has them in his trunk. I took one more look at his car parked in the corner spot by the woods, and I said okay. I believe in karma, and I knew I'd have bad karma if I left this man stranded in a situation that I could have easily helped him out in. He backed away from the car so I could pull my car next to his. Since he was parked head in, I did the same to align our hoods as close as possible. I got out from my car after popping my hood. He went to go pop his hood and grab his jumper cables. After we connected the cables to the respective terminals, I started my car again. We gave it a minute before I told him he should go try starting his car. He took his sweet time walking inside, but when he tried starting it, the car didn't start. So we gave it another couple of minutes, and then he tried it again. Still nothing. This was weird considering he had just been driving the car, so his battery shouldn't need that long to get enough of a charge to start again. The guy then asked me to hang on as he walked away and got on his phone. He started speaking in Spanish in a pretty low volume. I can't really understand Spanish, so I wasn't even bothering trying to hear what he was saying. He came back to me after his call and said that his friend said to give it a few more minutes and try one more time. I said okay. I was trying to do the right thing, but I was also hoping this wasn't going to eat up much more of my time. But the last thing I was expecting was hearing the aggressive sound of 2 pickup truck engines flooring it into the parking lot, one from either side of the building. I instantly put it together. I said "oh shit" under my breath as I removed the jumper cables from my battery and shut the hood in a hurry, but it was too late. The 2 trucks pulled up behind my car, trapping me in. I had to think on my feet. I looked at the man, who was still smiling at me, but now the smile looked and felt much more nefarious and evil. The look he gave me was so unsettling, and it's engraved into my memory. I locked my car with my key fob and darted into the woods. I ran in the dark, cutting up my shins and God knows what. I tripped over something on the ground, and at that point, I took that as the time to lay down and make myself as tiny as possible. I heard a few men yelling in Spanish somewhere in the woods. I was so scared for my life as the voices got closer. I don't think it gets any more tense than what I was experiencing in that moment. I didn't know how many there were, I didn't know if they were armed, but I heard at least 3 voices. And then the voices started fading away back into the distance, and I felt a sense of relief, until the sound of my car alarm going off in the distance. All of my stuff was packed in the back of my car. Hundreds of dollars worth of clothes, shoes, watches, bracelets. I started making my way back to the parking lot, crouching down. By the time I got close enough to look into the lot, I could see it was just my car there. All 3 other vehicles were gone. I ran out to my car, and it was anyone's worst nightmare. My rear window was shattered, and all of my stuff was gone. Basically 80% of my entire wardrobe, just stolen. My suitcase in the trunk, and all the bags in the back seats. Everything. I actually started to shed tears out of pure stress. I called the police and explained everything. The officers on scene told me they would have to get the CCTV footage from the Wendy's when they opened. After taking all of my info, I was told I didn't need to stay in town and they would be in touch. I was about 2 hours from home. I turned around and drove home. It was the most stressful, depressing, and defeated drive of my life. To make matters worse, I was contacted by the police department in Jersey, and they told me the vehicle in the Wendy's lot had a fake license plate, and the 2 pickup trucks didn't have plates. He told me they were still going to do what they can, but I knew that was just him trying to give me a sense of hope. My stuff was never found. Those bastards got away with it. Like I said, I believe in karma, and I hope those pieces of filth got what was coming to them. We've all taken a long car trip, haven't we? We've all passed that rest area sign multiple times, wondering if we could make it another 20 minutes or not before having to take a pee break or stretch. Sometimes you're lucky and get one of those huge rest areas with the big buildings with food and everything. But most other times, depending on where you are, you'll be lucky to get a little one with a tiny building just for restrooms and nothing else. Well, I was on a long road trip. A 15-hour road trip, actually. And a big chunk of that drive was overnight. I won't say from where to where because I don't really think that matters much. But I will say that I was in some bumfucky area on the east coast of the US. It was late at night and I was powering through the drive. Not many cars on the road at this hour. In fact, it was a pretty rare scene to see another car on the road this late. I was reaching that uncomfortable point in the ride where I had to use the bathroom, and I was just getting overall antsy in my seat from sitting for so long. I started keeping an eye out for a rest area sign, and when I saw that familiar blue sign, it felt like a saving grace. So a few miles later, I veered off into the rest area. It was a small one, but there was a restroom building and that's all I needed. There were no trucks parked here. I'm pretty sure they could only stay overnight at designated truck rest areas. But there was another car in the parking lot. I considered the possibility that whoever it was asleep in their car. As I got out from my car, I stretched a bit, and on my way to the bathroom, I looked at the other car in the lot. But the windows appeared to be tinted, so I couldn't see if someone was inside of it or not. Not that it was a big deal in the moment, I was just curious. I got inside the bathroom, and I was faced with a strange sight. There was a man standing in the corner of the bathroom with his head looking down and his back towards me. At first I thought he was using the urinal, but I quickly realized he wasn't even facing the closest urinal. He was literally just facing the corner of the wall. I paused and I didn't know whether to say something or not. I almost said, "Are you alright?" but the scene was just too weird. I had to walk closer to him though to get to the stall, and honestly, I was almost scared to get near him. I just tried to mind my business and keep a normal pace. I walked into the stall and closed the door. Honestly though, I couldn't go to the bathroom with someone else in the room. I'm one of those people. It was just too dead silent in there. It was weird. I stood in the stall for like a minute trying to at least pee, but I couldn't for some reason. I flushed the toilet anyway and left the stall. But now, the man had turned around. He was still standing in the same spot, but now he was facing me. I could see his face, and he was looking at me. I'm not one to ever judge someone's appearance, but this man was the scariest looking man I'd ever seen. There was something so unsettling about his face, specifically his eye region. The expression he had was a blank stare. I hadn't had a social interaction in over 10 hours, and this caught me way off guard. Instead of saying anything, I quickly turned and headed out of the bathroom. I got to my car and wasted no time turning it on and backing it up. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw that man walking in the direction of my car. I drove fast away to get him out of my sight. I was relieved to get back on the highway. However, that was the only relief I got. I still had to use the bathroom. I was sure it would only be another 20 minutes or so till the next one. I could hold it. I was right, it was about 20 minutes before I got to the next rest area. It was another nearly identical one as the other. Like I said earlier, most are pretty similar. No cars were in this one, thank God. I pulled into a spot right in front of the bathroom and hurried to the stall, and let's just say I felt a lot better very quickly. As I was finishing up in the stall, I heard footsteps enter the room. I thought they'd stop at one of the urinals, but the footsteps came straight to the stall and stopped. I saw someone's shoes through the bottom crack of the door. They were literally standing on the other side of the stall. My first thought was that it was that guy from the other bathroom. He followed me. My social anxiety was handicapping me from saying anything initially, until I finally mustered up the courage to say, "Someone's in here." No response to this, though. Now I knew I was in trouble. The only thing I could do was dial 911, put it on speaker so that the man could hear the operator say, "911, what's your emergency?" I said loud and clear, "I'm being followed by a dangerous man. I feel threatened." As the operator asked my location and details, I answered everything in a loud voice, in a tone suggesting that I was implying a "f*** you" to the man. Thank God this worked, as the person turned and walked out of the bathroom. I told this to the operator, but said I still would feel safer waiting in here until police came, and that's what I did. A knock at the bathroom door from a police officer was my cue to safely come out. I described the man and the vehicle I saw at the other rest area, the creepy encounter, and then the second creepy encounter at this one. We checked my car as well to make sure it wasn't messed with at all. After determining that he was gone, the officer and I left the rest area at the same time, and eventually he turned off the highway. The rest of my road trip went normal, but damn was this a terrifying night. I'd never been followed before. I know with almost 100% certainty that the person outside of the stall was the same creep that was in the first bathroom. It just feels extra weird because I'm a male. These things I feel like usually seem to happen to women, but I guess it can really happen to anyone. For a very brief 2 months, I worked as a delivery driver for the app DoorDash. It was to make some quick money on the side on the weekends. I live in a suburb of Nevada, so deliveries are usually quick and close. Someone made a big order to a local burger joint, and I accepted the delivery. When the food was finished, I loaded it into my car and checked the destination on the app. It was a house across town in a cul-de-sac. I tended to drive quickly over the speed limit to get more deliveries out, aka get more money. When you drive like me though, you're bound to get into some trouble once in a while. And this time, as I was driving up the block towards the cul-de-sac, I saw the sickening glow of the blue and red lights in my rearview mirror. I pulled to the side and got written a ticket for more money than I'd possibly even make that night. It was a horrible feeling that I'd spent my night doing deliveries only to end up losing money. Still, I had to finish this delivery, albeit a bit late now. After the cop got back in his car, I drove right down towards the cul-de-sac. I got to the house, ran towards the front door, and knocked really hard since there was apparently no doorbell. As I waited for the door to open, I looked around this dark cul-de-sac. I say dark because there weren't any streetlights,
only the small amount of light that was given off by the 3 total houses sitting on the street. It was a pretty unusual dead end, not a nice looking spot by any means. The house wasn't exactly the prettiest either. The door finally opened, and an average height bald guy opened the door. He had a grayish beard with brown stains in the middle. His body language and way of behaving was immediately weird, screaming drunk or a drug addict. To top it off, his breath was awful as he said, "How you doing?" in his loud, obnoxious voice. He told me to come in. I told him no, it's okay, as I held out his bag of food, waiting for him to grab it so I could leave. He said, No, come in, I got something for you." I told him, "Really, it's okay, I need to be on my way." He said something along the lines of not being able to tip me through the app, so he'd have to give me some cash money. Against my better judgment, I entered the house with his food still in my hand. I heard a car pulling up into the cul-de-sac as I stepped inside. As soon as I cleared the door, the man slammed it shut and told me to follow him to the kitchen and to put the food on the table. For some reason, even as uncomfortable as this guy made me, I followed him into his disgusting, messy, smelly kitchen. He went into his basement and told me to wait there in the kitchen. He shut the door and I heard him stomping down his steps. I stood there feeling awkward, but also nervous. There was a short silence, and I stood there looking at my phone, texting a couple friends about what I was experiencing currently. Suddenly, there was a huge crash from down in the basement. It sounded like a big shelf holding a bunch of smaller items toppling over, followed by what was a scream for help. It seemed as though the man was hurt by whatever had fallen down. I ran to the basement door and opened it, and to my surprise, looked down to see nothing but darkness. Not a single light was on. I called down into the basement, "You okay?" I heard the man moaning in apparent pain in the darkness below. I asked where the light switch was. Instead, he just kept saying, "Help." I used the flashlight on my Samsung to start walking down the noisy, creaky stairs. As I got maybe halfway down, the man's moaning sound stopped and it was completely silent. I stopped as I realized how silent it had grown and asked if he was still okay. There was no response. Suddenly, I got a really bad feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. I heard a small cracking sound from in front of the steps, like a pebble being crushed against a concrete floor. Then, there was a loud knocking at the front door upstairs. I turned and ran upstairs to open it, and it was the cop who had pulled me over about 5 minutes ago. He was holding something familiar, 2 folded pieces of paper paper-clipped together, asking me if it was mine. It was, and I grabbed it from him. But I also told him in obvious distress that I thought something strange was going on with this man who I just delivered food to. I told him it sounded like he got injured downstairs, but that it also seemed suspicious. I showed the cop to the basement door, and with his hand on his holster, he called down into the basement. I told him there wasn't a light switch, so he took out his flashlight and started walking down the stairs slowly. I waited at the top of the stairs as he progressed to the bottom step, then disappeared from my view. I didn't wait too long before hearing a commotion downstairs. The cop seemed to be yelling in response to being attacked. The commotion ended with a gunshot. Then there were cries of pain, genuine cries this time. The cop called up to me to come help him get the guy upstairs. He asked me to hold the flashlight as he guided the man who was now cuffed up the stairs. All the while, he was screaming in pain and at the cop. The cop brought him outside and called for an ambulance on his radio. He wanted me to stick around to sign a witness statement. I stuck around for about half an hour before I left and went home. Who would have thought the same cop who wrote me a ticket would potentially save my life 10 minutes later? I occasionally do some deliveries for Postmates, usually late at night after work during the week or on weekends. I use my motorcycle as it allows me to get from point A to point B faster. I was delivering some Mexican food to a guy named Ron. It was a 15-minute drive from the burrito place to Ron's address. When I got to the listed address, I brought the food up the long driveway and up to the front door. I rang the bell, and an older woman opened the door. I said delivery for Ronnie, but the woman looked confused and said there's no Ronnie here. I apologized and said I had the wrong house. So I went back to my bike and double-checked the app, making sure I was at the right house. And according to the app, I was. The house number was 15, just like listed on the app. I figured it was time to call this Ron guy to figure out if he had made a mistake with the address. I used the call feature on the app, but after one ring, it went to voicemail. So I tried texting instead, and within seconds, he replied back. I told him the address he gave me was wrong, and he swiftly said, yeah, sorry about that. He explained that he didn't actually live here, but that he was chilling with his friend in the preserve across the street from the house listed on the delivery. He requested I come into the nature preserve by the fire and drop it off there. He mentioned he was sorry about this and was planning on leaving a generous tip. One time before, I did have someone request I drop off their food at a park near their house, so at that moment it didn't seem like the strangest thing in the world. It was just a slight inconvenience, but one that he'd apparently make up for with the tip. The preserve was gated, but there happened to be an opening leading into it right across the street from the house. I followed the dirt trail until the light post ended, and any further I would be walking into complete darkness. I looked around for the light of the fire, and as a matter of fact, I did see a hint of light coming from the woods. I started making my way over into the increasing darkness of the woods, leaving the lit up area. As I got closer, I could confirm it was light from a fire. Why were they in the middle of the woods, though? And the question of why they were expecting me to bring it to them out there started to ring in my head. I yelled out Ron's name a few times when I was within yelling distance of the fire. No answer. When I got close enough, I noticed something. There was no one sitting around that campfire. I asked myself, was that the right fire? But that was a silly question. How many fires could there be on a weeknight in the preserve? I walked a little closer to the fire and noticed a tent behind it. Maybe they were in there. So once again, I yelled Ron's name as I approached the tent. It was zipped up. I tapped on the tent and said Ron's name again. So I finally unzipped the tent and knelt down to look inside. I saw someone laying down on their stomach, facing away from me, so that their shoes were only a few inches from my face. They seemed to be asleep. This was getting a bit ridiculous, so I just marked the order as delivered and turned ready to walk away. I didn't even make it a single step before noticing someone standing about 20 feet from me, between two big trees. He called out, "Are you alone?" "No," I said. "My friend is just over there." The guy asked, "Why aren't you alone?" I said I do my deliveries with a partner. He asked, "Where's my food?" I was about to tell him it was in the tent, when I felt two hands grab both my legs and tried pulling me down. I looked down and saw the arms reaching out from the tent. Ron, presumably the guy who I was just talking to, started charging at me. With only maybe 5 seconds to act, I did manage to escape the grasp of the two hands and run past Ron, if that was even his real name. I don't think he chased me after I left the vicinity of the fire. I found my way back to the bike easily, and I drove off without taking a second to look back. I contacted Postmates customer service about it. They told me I should escalate it to the police, as there was nothing they could do. By the time they even responded with that, I didn't even feel up to going through with a police report. I just figured I'd let it go. I got lucky and I was unharmed. Still, it taught me one thing. If your instinct tells you to turn and walk away, do it. For some reason, I never really used any of those food delivery apps until recently, after learning how convenient they are. One night after a late work shift, I didn't have time to make dinner, so I ordered some Chinese food off Postmates. It was originally estimated to be delivered in half an hour, but I waited a lot longer than that. Around the 45-minute mark is when I started getting impatient. I called the Postmate driver, and he picked up after a few rings. I asked him where he was. He asked, "Who is this?" I said, "Tracy, the girl he was delivering food for." There was a short silence. Then he said, "Oh yes, I'm on my way." So I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my living room with the TV on and basically just played around on my phone, dying for the Postmates driver to just show up already. Just then, my phone started vibrating, and knowing that it was likely the Postmates driver calling me, I felt very relieved that the food was probably here at last. I picked up and waited for him to say something. I had to say hello like 4 times before he finally started speaking. He said he's outside. I didn't really know how to respond to that, so I said okay and then described my house to him. Then he said something weird. He asked me to come outside to get the food. I opened my front door to check if he was there. He wasn't. I asked him where he was as I stepped out onto the front deck. There was another pause. I looked around my whole front yard and didn't see anyone. I told him I didn't see him. He said, "I see you." Again, I didn't know how to respond, but the way he said it was just so creepy. The last thing he said before I hung up the phone was, "You look really pretty." At that point, I went inside and slammed my door shut and locked it. I opened the Postmates app, and it said my food was delivered. I didn't know what was going on here, but I was growing increasingly uncomfortable. I shut off all the lights in my house and started looking out each window. I started with the living room windows. Didn't see anyone. Then I checked the dining room windows. Nothing. Next, the kitchen. Still no one. So I went down to our den, which was by the back door. I hadn't raised the curtain that morning because of work, so I pulled the string to raise it up. Only a little bit. Just enough to peek under to check the backyard. This whole time I was looking out windows, I don't think I actually expected to see someone. But when I looked under the curtain to the den window, I saw a man sitting in my back patio. He wasn't on his phone, he wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting there, as if he were waiting for me. I lowered the curtain back down, and then my phone rang. It was the guy again. I picked up, and he immediately said, "I just saw you at the window." All I said to him was, "I'm calling the cops," and I hung up. I went back to the living room and called the cops. The man on the phone said an officer would be over shortly. After I hung up, my phone kept ringing. It was the man. I kept rejecting his calls, but he wouldn't stop. Sitting there waiting for the cops was one of the most tense moments of my life. Eventually, there was a knock at the door, followed by a man shouting, "Police." I jumped off the couch and ran to open the door. I was confused to see not a man in a police uniform, but some man in some dirty street clothes who gave a disturbing smile as soon as we made eye contact. He opened the storm door and tried to get in, but I pushed the front door hard enough to get it shut and lock it. He didn't bang on the door, he didn't scream anything. I think he simply ran off after that. A few minutes later, the actual police showed up, and they searched the property with me. We found the man's phone left on the table in the backyard. The background to the phone was a white guy with a blonde girl, presumably his girlfriend. I note this because the man who was on my stoop was not white, he was Hispanic. I did a little detective work with the cops and came to the conclusion that this man was not originally my Postmates driver, that he had stolen the driver's phone somehow mid-delivery. The police confiscated the phone and left after taking a report. As far as I know, that man never returned to my house, but this was easily the scariest experience of my life.
I'm a single guy in my mid-30s. This happened a few years ago during a somewhat depressing period in my life. I had just broken up with my girlfriend of 5 years, the girl I thought I'd be marrying one day and starting a family with. It's safe to say I was pretty lost at that time. I can't lie, the psychological damage of the breakup was pretty severe. I spent entire weeks sulking and forgetting to take care of myself. I'd wake up, talk to no one, go to work, talk to no one, and come home to spend the rest of the day in bed. The weekends were even worse. I'd forget to eat and I wouldn't leave the house. I'd binge watch movie after mind-numbing movie, not even realizing what I was watching half the time. But enough with the sob story. I'm much better now, although I still often think about the life I could have had if things went differently. Anyway, it was a Saturday night. I was slumped on the couch, barely moving except to hit play on another random movie. I couldn't even tell you what it was. Just another mindless action flick I'd forget about by the time it ended. For context, I was in my room, which is on the second floor of my house. I have a couch and a TV in my bedroom, so I typically never watch TV anywhere else but there. At one point, I looked down at my phone. It was a few minutes after 9 p.m. I remember that distinctly because my mom was calling me for like the 4th time that day. I didn't want to ignore her, but I let it ring out anyway. I knew she meant well, but I couldn't bring myself to talk. I didn't want to hear the usual questions about whether I'd eaten or gone outside. Eventually, I got tired of whatever was playing and backed out to the menu. I wasn't really in the mood for anything, but I clicked on some random horror movie I'd never heard of. It was one of those generic ones with a grainy thumbnail. I figured I'd half watch it until I fell asleep. About 20 minutes in, I realized the movie was even worse than I expected. The audio was a mess. Every time someone talked, I had to turn the volume way up just to catch a word or two. And then the next sound effect would blast through the speakers and damn near rupture my eardrums. For whatever reason though, I kept the movie on. I think it was just because I was too lazy to change it again. At some point, I started noticing this weird sound effect in the movie. It was this sharp, metallic clang, kind of like a pipe hitting concrete. It didn't match anything that was happening on the screen. No one was holding metal, and no one was in a warehouse or anything like that, and it wasn't timed with the scares either. It would just show up every minute or so, like the director had accidentally looped it or something. Same exact sound, same volume, and same pitch. It was almost too consistent to be a coherent sound design choice. That, plus the fact that the rest of the audio was mixed so poorly, made me question how the movie had even made it to streaming platforms. The poor quality of the movie actually made it harder to turn off, partly because I was enjoying criticizing it, but also partly because I needed to see how something so terrible would play out. About halfway through, I got up to use the bathroom, and for whatever reason, I actually paused the movie instead of not caring enough about what was going on. When I got back and sat down, I grabbed the remote and hovered over the play button, but right as I was about to press it, I heard that sound again. That same sharp metallic clang, except this time, the movie was paused. I froze for a second, just staring at the screen. No audio, no movement, but the sound had been clear as day, and it had come from somewhere inside the house. That's when it clicked. It had never been part of the movie. I stayed completely still, trying to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I watched the paused screen and just listened, hoping my mind had just been playing a trick on me. But then, about 45 seconds later, there it was again. The exact same clang. I didn't waste another second. I immediately jumped up, grabbed a knife from my desk, and started moving room to room, frantically checking every place someone could possibly be hiding. Every room in the house was clear though. There was no one. In fact, there were no signs that anything was out of place either. But as I walked back up the stairs with my heart still pounding, I heard the clang again. It wasn't as loud this time, meaning it must have been coming from my room, where I had been watching the movie. But I had been sitting there the whole time, so that didn't make any sense. That's when it hit me. I had a few windows open. It was spring, and the weather had finally started warming up, so I'd gotten into the habit of cracking them in the evenings to let some air in. I started thinking maybe the sound wasn't coming from inside the house at all. Maybe it had been coming from right outside the house this whole time. I don't know why, but that thought scared me even more. I went over to the window and pushed the curtain aside just enough to get a look at the backyard, and there it was. One of the deck chairs was sitting out in the middle of the lawn, maybe 20 feet from the house. And standing next to the chair was a kid, a young kid. I couldn't really make out any of his facial features given that it was so dark out, but the silhouette was way too small to be an adult. It was 100% a little kid. He was holding what looked like a PVC pipe, which explained the noise I had been hearing. He must have seen me, because as soon as I looked out the window, he smacked the pipe against the chair. I instantly stepped away from the window and felt my body start filling with fear. I know it sounds silly that I was afraid of something like that, but I couldn't fathom what that kid was doing outside my house. Did he have some kind of mental disorder? It didn't make sense. And then I thought about the fact that he must have been standing out there for nearly an hour, which freaked me out even more. I tried to slow my breathing and think rationally. Maybe the kid was lost. Maybe he had wandered off from a nearby house and didn't know how to get back. I told myself I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. So I went down the stairs and made my way through the house toward the back door, trying to keep calm. I even turned on the porch light, thinking it might help the kid feel less spooked, or at least give me a better look at him. As I was turning the doorknob, I froze. Something about it felt wrong, like I was walking into some kind of trap. If that kid were really lost, wouldn't he ring my doorbell or call out to me through my window? And even if he were too scared to, and ultimately decided that banging a pipe against one of my chairs was the best option, would he really stick to that strategy after a whole hour? It was insane. Something in my gut told me not to go outside, so I slowly backed away from the door. I crept over to a small window just left of the door, one that overlooked the porch and part of the backyard. I kept the light off behind me and slowly tilted the blind with 2 fingers, just enough to see through without drawing attention, and there they were. There were 2 men wearing all black, crouching below my back door, as if ready to ambush me the second I opened it. I must have stared too long, because one of the men suddenly turned his head and locked eyes with me through the glass. I dropped the blinds and instantly dialed 911. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard banging on the back door. Those guys were trying to break in. I sprinted to my bathroom and locked the door. By that point, I was having a full-on panic attack. I felt like I couldn't move. I was struggling to breathe, honestly. Shortly after I got to the bathroom, I heard a crash from downstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps walking around below me. Those people were in my house. I heard a set of footsteps walking up the stairs, and I held my breath as they made their way down the hall. I saw the bathroom doorknob turn ever so slightly, followed by a loud bang, like they were trying to kick the door down. That made me lose it. I yelled at the top of my lungs that the police were on their way, and the person on the other side of the door instantly ran back down the stairs. A few seconds later, I heard one of the doors slam, then silence. The police arrived shortly after that, and I told them everything. There wasn't much they could do. I didn't have any cameras, and I wasn't even able to give them any valuable information. The one thing that made them take things a little more seriously was the fact that there was a child involved. According to the police, that kind of involvement suggested whoever these guys were, they weren't just impulsive criminals. They were willing to go way further, and that was the scariest part for me too. I don't like thinking about the poor kid's involvement in the whole thing. Every explanation I came up with is equally sickening. The police told me I was likely the target of a random attack, but the whole scheme was just way too elaborate, in my opinion. Nothing has happened since, though, and I've since moved on with my life. I just really hope that kid is somehow safe, even though I know the odds are slim. It's currently 2024 as I'm writing this. I'm a senior and I'm graduating in a couple weeks. Let me give you all a very brief rant. I never understood how most of my friends could survive a whole week-long spring break trip to Miami or some other party destination. I simply can't. So for every year of college, spring break was an excuse for me to just go home and relax. This past spring break was no different. I'd essentially be going off the grid for a week, taking a break from grueling schoolwork and mindless drama. I was actually really pissed because I had been working on a flawless regrade request for a midterm I had just taken, and my scummy TA denied it for no good reason. But anyway, it was a Monday morning. I didn't really have any plans, just needed to get a workout in, but that was about it. I've always been a morning workout guy. It's the one thing that makes me feel like I have my life together. So even though I was home for spring break and technically had nothing to do, I still set my alarm for 6 a.m. and forced myself out of bed. I figured if I got to the gym early enough, I could beat the rush. By 6:20, I was already dressed, out the door, and on the road. The drive to the gym takes about 15 minutes, mostly back roads through quiet residential neighborhoods. Nothing ever really happens out there. It was definitely a nice place to grow up in, but a little boring once I got older and all my childhood friends started moving on with their lives. I was driving along listening to some YouTube beats when something strange caught my eye. There was an ice cream truck parked along the curb, just sitting there, engine off, no lights. That wouldn't have been weird in the summer, I guess, but this was mid-March. It was still kind of chilly out. All the kids were still in school too. There was no reason for an ice cream truck to be sitting there at 6:30 in the morning. It looked completely out of place. As I drove past the truck, I slowed down just enough to glance through the driver's window. It was empty. By the time I turned the corner and left it behind, I found myself thinking more about it than I should have. I don't know why. The sight just felt a little bizarre. It wasn't just that it was too early in the year for ice cream trucks. It was that I couldn't remember ever even seeing one in my neighborhood at all. Not even when I was a kid. My area just wasn't that kind of place. As weird as the whole thing was, I quickly dismissed it and proceeded with my workout. After the gym, I got a quick bite to eat and headed home, feeling like I'd actually done something with my morning. But as I turned onto the same street from earlier, the ice cream truck was still there, in the same exact spot. That made me pause. I figured someone would have called it in by now. This is the kind of neighborhood where people are really uptight and get twitchy if you park too long in front of their house. That actually reminds me of a time when some grumpy woman gave my friends and I crap for parking in front of her house, even though we were waiting for our other friend who lived right next door. I say that to say that I'm not crazy for expecting someone to have called the police about the truck. Curiosity got the better of me. Instead of heading straight home, I circled around the block to pass the truck again, just to see if someone was inside it now, and someone was. As I drove past the second time, I must have been a little too obvious with how slowly I was driving, because the guy in the front seat locked eyes with me for a few seconds. He looked really off. He had this long, almost cartoonishly pointed nose and a scraggly beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in years. He genuinely looked like someone who lived in his vehicle, and it rubbed me the wrong way. I drove straight home after that. My parents were both at work, so I had the place to myself. I spent the next few hours just killing time. Sometime in the afternoon, I walked down the driveway to check the mail. As I got to the end of the driveway, I glanced down the street and nearly died inside. It was that same ice cream truck from before. It was parked across the street, about 3 houses down. It wasn't facing me, but I had a feeling it wasn't just a coincidence. I didn't move for a second. I just stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had that guy really followed me home? I knew he had. There was no other explanation. I grabbed the mail and walked straight back inside, trying not to make it obvious that I'd seen anything. Once I was upstairs, though, I went to one of the guest bedrooms. There's a window that overlooks the street from a better angle, so I pulled the curtain aside and peeked through. Sure enough, the ice cream truck was still there. I watched it for a few minutes, but nothing happened. I'm not sure what I expected to see, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. Eventually, I had no choice. I didn't have all day to spend staring out a window, so I tried to get some stuff done on my laptop. I couldn't focus, though. Every half hour or so, I'd feel the urge to go back to the guest room and glance out the window. Every time I looked, the ice cream truck was still visible, but it was in a different spot, which meant the driver was intentionally moving around the street for whatever reason. I didn't know whether it was a good idea to call the police or not. I wasn't sure what I'd even say, given that nothing had actually happened. Even now, I wish that I had just done what any normal person would have done and either called the police or tried to ignore the truck, but I was too curious. My older brother is really into bird watching, so I started digging around his room for a set of binoculars I knew was in there somewhere. Eventually, I found them and returned to the guest room. I pulled the curtains aside and looked at the truck through the binoculars. I was not prepared for what I was about to see. Through the driver's side window, I could see that man from earlier, only he wasn't just sitting there. He was looking back at me with a pair of his own binoculars. As soon as he saw me looking, he instantly dropped the binoculars, started the truck, and drove off. I was horrified. That guy had been spying on me and my house for the better part of 3 hours after literally stalking me home. That's when I finally called the police. I didn't even know what I was expecting from it. I just didn't know what else to do. I told them that this ice cream truck had been circling my neighborhood all day, that I'd seen a man inside watching my house through binoculars, and that he drove off the second I looked back. The dispatcher was calm and told me they'd send someone to patrol the area and keep an eye out. She told me it should be relatively easy to spot an ice cream truck given how distinctive they were. Then she hung up. I didn't know what else to do after that. When my parents got home a little while later, I filled them in. They were obviously concerned, but they also told me it probably wasn't worth worrying about anymore. I was pretty tired by then, so I fell asleep pretty quickly. Sometime later, I woke randomly in the middle of the night. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone off my nightstand. It was sometime just after 3 a.m. I sat there in bed, trying to figure out what had woken me up, when I heard it. Music. It was very faint, almost too faint to notice at first. I kept listening, and panic started building inside me when I realized what kind of music it was. The jingle of an ice cream truck. Before I could do anything, something clicked softly against the glass of my bedroom window. I instantly connected the dots. Someone was throwing rocks at my window. That had to be what had woken me up. The music was way too quiet on its own. I sat frozen for a while, staring at the wall across from me. I kept telling myself to look, to just get up and check. But every time I started to move, my body locked up again. Eventually, I forced myself to do it. I crept toward the window and stood to the side of it for a second. On the count of 3, I peeled back the curtain in one fluid motion and looked. The man from earlier was standing in the middle of my front yard, right below my window, and on either side of him, holding his hands, were 2 small children, or at least they looked like children based on how short they were. I really couldn't tell on account of how dark it was. I didn't waste another second. I tried to ignore the pounding in my chest, stepped away from the window, and immediately went to wake up my dad. I had already dialed 911 by the time he went downstairs to have a look around. My dad's a pretty tough guy, so I figured he'd want to handle things himself. Unfortunately, that man had somehow slipped away in the few minutes it took us to get outside. The police arrived a while later. A few days went by and we never heard anything, and I eventually had to go back to school, but my parents promised me they'd be on high alert. That was almost a month ago, and luckily, my parents haven't told me about any strange occurrences since then. The reason I'm writing this now, though, is because my mom called me a few days ago. Apparently, there was a missing persons case that had just gone public in our hometown. 2 6-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, had vanished from a neighborhood about 30 minutes from where we lived. The moment she said it, my mind went straight back to that night, to those 2 small figures standing on either side of the man in my front yard. The whole thing honestly makes me sick. Why would that guy sit in my house for hours and throw rocks at my windows in the middle of the night? And why even go to those lengths if he was involved in something as serious as a kidnapping? Maybe he was worried that I had somehow caught on to what he was doing, but if he had really taken those kids, wouldn't attention be the last thing he'd want? And then there's the kids themselves. I wonder if they were already with him when I first saw the truck that morning, or were they somewhere else? I really can't stop thinking about it. The only explanation I can come up with is the type of person who'd kidnap a child doesn't think like normal people do, which is why that man would risk getting caught just to freak me out. My mom followed up with the police to try and shed some light on the case and our possible connection to it. If anything ever happens, I will send an update. This happened last spring, about 9 months ago. I'm a sales associate for BMW, so my weeks are pretty busy. When I'm not at the dealership, I'm answering my phone. Because of all the phone work involved, sometimes I feel like I have more to do when I'm not at the dealership, as funny as that sounds. Because of the nature of my work, I pretty much have to answer my phone every time it rings, especially when it's an unknown caller. So, as you'd expect, I get a lot of scam calls, but I have no choice but to answer, just in case it's a client or an interested party. One night, sometime after 10 p.m., my phone started ringing. It was a number my phone didn't recognize. Normally, I would have picked up without thinking, but this time I was already in bed halfway through winding down. Something about how late it was just made me let it ring out. They didn't leave a voicemail. I figured if it was important, they'd leave one. But a few minutes later, the same number called again. I sat up and answered it. I was a little irritated, but I still tried to keep my voice polite, just in case it was someone serious. At first, all I heard was static, just this thick, uneven fuzz. I was about to hang up when I caught something underneath it. A voice. I held the phone closer and listened. It was my voice. I was 100% sure of it. That actually made me freeze up a little bit. After a few seconds, I realized it was more than just a recording of my voice. It was a conversation I'd had earlier that day with a client. Just standard stuff, pricing, availability, setting up a test drive. Nothing sensitive, but it was definitely real. It was definitely my voice. I still don't know if it was the right decision, but I instantly hung up the phone. I sat there for a while, just staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. I wasn't panicking, but I definitely wasn't calm either. The best way I can describe what I was feeling was a mix of confusion and unease. My first thought was that maybe it was the client I had talked to earlier. Maybe he had accidentally called me while trying to play back the call or record it for his own notes. I really don't know. It felt like a stretch, but it was the only explanation that didn't immediately spiral into something worse. That didn't really explain why the number was unknown instead of the number he had called from earlier, but it was the best I could come up with. The next morning, I decided to call him back just for my own sanity. He answered right away and seemed totally normal, friendly even. But when I brought up the call from the night before, he had no idea what I was talking about. He sounded genuinely confused. I apologized for the mix-up and hung up, and for whatever reason, I believed him. The rest of the day was normal. I had a few appointments, followed up with some leads, nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't think too much about the call from the night before, but later that night, around the same time, I got another call. The number wasn't saved in my phone again, but it was different from the number that had called me the night before. This time, I answered it immediately. Exactly what I was dreading happened. It was another static-heavy recording of a conversation I had that day with a client. A different client. A whole different conversation entirely. I hung up again without saying anything. That night was when it really started getting to me, because now it felt intentional, and I noticed something else. The recording didn't include the client's voice. It was only me talking, like a one-sided call. I started wondering if someone had been listening in on my conversations and recording me somehow. I didn't sleep very well that night, as I couldn't stop thinking about it, but I didn't know what to do. I never thought I was a paranoid person, but the next week of my life proved me wrong. Every night for a week, the same thing would happen. I'd get a call from a random number and would listen to a staticky recording of a conversation I'd had that day. I started recording the calls myself. I can't even tell you why. I just thought it was the smart thing to do. By the third or fourth night, it started to wear on me. Not just in a creepy, this is weird kind of way. I mean, it started to actually mess with my head. I couldn't relax, I couldn't think. I'd catch myself looking out the window every few minutes, like someone might be standing out there watching me. I started triple locking my front door. Then I started leaving a light on in every room at night. At one point, I even moved a chair in front of my bedroom door. Looking back, it's really hard for me to explain any of these decisions, but my mind was in a very different place during that period. Anytime my phone rang, even during the day, I'd step outside and answer it from the safety of my car, where I could see every angle around me. It sounds crazy now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At one point, I even brought it up with the police. I felt ridiculous doing it, but I figured if someone was monitoring me, I had to at least make some kind of report. The officer I spoke to was polite enough, but I could tell right away they didn't take it seriously. He said they could try looking into the numbers, but unless there was a direct threat or evidence of harassment, there wasn't much they could do. I don't know if they actually tried to trace the calls or just filed it away and forgot about it. Either way, it didn't help. If anything, it made me feel more alone in it. A few days later, though, the calls suddenly stopped. That week of obsessively checking my surroundings and answering calls from my car must have deterred whoever was harassing me. Part of me wanted to believe it was over, but I couldn't relax. If anything, the sudden absence of contact actually caused me to spiral even further into paranoia. My mom is schizophrenic, so I always figured I was predisposed to developing some kind of mental condition, but it was literally happening right before my very eyes. I was becoming one of those reclusive people who think the entire world is spying on them. I ended up getting a brand new personal phone number. It was a massive headache. Switching numbers meant having to reestablish contact with clients, update everything linked to my phone, and risk missing out on people trying to get in touch with me. But I did it anyway. I couldn't shake the feeling that my old number had been compromised somehow. After a few more days of radio silence, the thing I was dreading happened. One night after work, I got another call. It was exactly like the ones before it. I kept my cool, and instead of remaining silent and hanging up, I actually spoke. I said something along the lines of, "I don't know who you are or why you're doing this, but if it's money you want, I've got it." I went on to say that I'd happily pay to be left alone. I gave the person my address and said I'd be willing to meet. And then, for the first time, there was an actual voice on the other end. It sounded like they were using a voice changer. And all they said was, 11 o'clock, before hanging up. I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would I volunteer my address like that? Honestly, I can't answer that question. I was acting irrationally, I know that. But it's impossible for me to explain exactly how my mind was working during that time, so I'm not even gonna bother. The next 4 days were the most traumatic and stressful moments of my life. I'm not sure how much I can even type out without getting too graphic, but here goes. I have a handgun in my house for personal safety. I grabbed it from my room, loaded it, and sat at my kitchen table and waited. I can't even begin to explain all the thoughts that were bouncing around in my head as I sat there. I contemplated a lot of things in those 4 hours. I'd go as far as to say that had it not been for sheer chance, I might not be typing this out right now. Just thinking about that night gives me a sickening feeling. 11 p.m. came and went, and no one showed up. There's no telling what I would have done had they actually showed up. I ended up sleeping at the kitchen table with the gun in my hand. It was by far the worst night of my life, but thankfully, that was the end of it. I never got another mysterious call again, but that didn't change the fact that that person had done irreparable damage to my mental state. It took me a lot of therapy and time off work to recover fully, and I still get chills thinking about how easily I was almost driven to complete madness. I will never have an explanation for what happened to me. I have no idea how that person recorded my conversations or who they even were. I have no idea why they harassed me or why they stopped for that matter. I've since moved out of that house, but there's not much I can do beyond that. If anything, this experience has made me a lot more fearful of the future. I can't help but think that I'm destined to end up just like my mom. Hopefully getting this out there will help me heal in some way.
I work nights for the Sheriff's Department in Bergen County. I've been on the force for 2 years. I haven't seen too much craziness, aside from late-night drug arrests, a few robbery calls, and a few assault calls. Northeastern Bergen County is pretty low crime after all, so those are usually the worst calls I deal with. There was this one night that I received a disturbance call to investigate a scream that came from a house nearby. Usually a call like this would mean a domestic dispute, or even just something as harmless as people drinking and being too loud. I arrived to the house though, and I had to confirm twice that it was the correct house because none of the lights were on. There was a car in the driveway though, a blue Toyota Sienna minivan. Someone was home. I went over to knock on the door a few times. The neighbor must have seen my car because he came out and walked over, reporting that he was the one to call the police. He told me he heard a blood-curdling scream from the house, and that the woman who lives there lives alone but occasionally had her boyfriend over, making it slightly more concerning. I tried the doorknob now, which was locked. I then made my way around the house, trying all the windows, which were all locked. All but one of the backyard windows. It was already slid completely up, enough for someone to climb through. This was a red flag, considering every other window was closed. I requested backup to the scene, and once I got confirmation, I climbed into the house through the window. I started to flick every light on that I could find in the house, starting in the kitchen and working my way to the living room. And yes, it's advisable for police to turn on the lights when investigating buildings. What you see in TV shows and movies where they leave the lights off is only done for suspense. I called out for the woman, trying to assure her it's okay, police were here. Though at that time, I still didn't know what exactly the situation was, other than she was reported screaming. There was no response no matter how loud I yelled. The first floor was clear, so there was only the upstairs left to check. I wanted to wait for backup to arrive, because I was nervous what I'd find up there, but I'd also not forgive myself if I waited and wasted precious time that I could have used to save this woman from a possible medical emergency. Before going up the stairs, I unlocked the front door for when backup would arrive. I then walked up the carpeted stairs quietly, and as I got halfway up the stairs, I peered over the ledge onto the second floor. There were 4 doors up there. I flicked on the light switch in the hallway and called out one more time. I heard a creak-type sound come from behind one of the doors, so she had to be in there. I opened the door, and it was a bedroom. The light was off, but the light from the hall was plenty to see a woman laying in bed under the covers. I saw the back of her head. I walked over to her to make sure she was okay, but as I was close, I noticed dark stains that soaked the other side of the covers. The side of her I couldn't see from the door. I yanked the covers off the woman and realized it was blood, and she'd been stabbed multiple times, but she was still breathing. I grabbed my walkie and reported a stabbing, requesting immediate backup and an ambulance. The creak I heard moments before suddenly made no sense if this woman was in bed like this. And given she was unconscious, someone placed her in the bed most likely. I did a 360 in place, looking around the room. There was a closet. It was instinctively the first place I'd think to look. I had my gun drawn and had my hand on the doorknob for 5 seconds, gathering the courage to yank the door open. When I finally did, there was no one inside. I turned around again to look at the bed, at the bleeding woman. Then I thought, the bed. I got on my knees to be level with the bottom of the bed. I yanked the bed wrap covering the bottom of the bed up, and I was then eye to eye with a man wearing a face mask covering the lower half of his face. I shrieked and yelled, "Show me your hands." He slowly raised his hands above his head as much as he could. I got up and told him to get out from under the bed slowly and made sure he wasn't holding the knife. I had him stand in the corner with his hands up until my backup came. I wasn't about to try and handcuff him in there alone, when he could have any weapon on his person. I told backup to meet me upstairs, and when they entered the house, I called up to them. Only then did I place the man under arrest. An ambulance arrived not too long after, and the woman was rushed to the hospital, and she managed to survive being stabbed 6 times. The man who did it was in fact her boyfriend, which I didn't find too surprising, honestly. The man had found out that she cheated on him with his friend, and when he called her about it, she broke up with him over the phone, and this must have caused the man to snap. I'm just very thankful the woman survived. This story was told to me by my best friend's uncle, who works the night shift as a police officer in our city. A year or so ago, Mike, my best friend's uncle, was out on his nightly patrol with his partner Steve. They've been working together for years, and they're both Army veterans, so they're very level-headed and calm people, perfect for being police officers. When they got a call from a landlord at an apartment complex complaining about one of his tenants, they didn't really expect anything bad. They get calls like that all the time, so they headed over to see what was going on. When they arrived, the landlord greeted them outside. It was probably 1 or 2 in the morning, and everyone from the complex was standing out in the grass, which was odd. The landlord approached Mike and Steve and started to rant about one of their neighbors being crazy and turning all of the water on in his apartment. Apparently he was some guy in his 30s, and he'd been acting weird lately. Mike could see that there was water seeping out from the front door to the place, and decided they had to go in and do a welfare check on the guy.
When they walked in, water was pouring down the stairs and clearly flooding the building, which meant that this water had to have been turned on for hours to cause this kind of damage. They climbed to the second story and knocked on the door where the water was gushing out from. The landlord told them that the tenant's name was Adam, and so they pounded on the door calling his name. No one answered for a couple minutes, and so they decided to break the door down. When they did, they spotted Adam standing in his kitchen. All of the sinks, the shower, and the toilet from the bathroom, and a hose from outside were gushing water everywhere. Adam was standing there shaking. His eyes were wide, like he was terrified to move. "Adam, what's going on? Are you all right?" Mike asked while his partner Steve walked further inside to check everything out. Steve walked into the bathroom to turn off the water and to make sure no one else was in the apartment. Mike slowly approached Adam, who seemed terrified because he was shaking so much. He didn't even look at Mike as he approached. Again, he was asked what was wrong, and he finally stuttered out that there are people in the walls. Mike didn't hear what he was saying at first, but as he got closer, Adam started to hear it over and over, louder and louder. "There are people in the walls," until he was almost screaming it, getting himself worked up. Steve walked into the bedroom next and was clearing the room when he checked the closet and noticed something as he turned on the light. There was a very faint line that ran across the wall. At first he didn't think anything of it, but then he heard what Adam was screaming, and a sinking feeling hit his gut. The more he stared at it, the more he realized that the line was in the shape of a door cut out of the wall. It clearly wasn't meant to be there. Mike was about to lead Adam out of the apartment when Steve suddenly called to him, "You better take a look at this." Mike went into the other room to see Steve pointing his gun at the wall in the bedroom, clearly freaked out. They both approached the door, guns raised, while Adam started to cry in the back room. Steve quickly pulled a piece of wall back, and they both froze when 3 sets of eyes stared back at them. 3 people were pressed together in this tiny space in the wall, their faces painted in weird patterns. Both Steve and Mike ordered them out and handcuffed each one. By that time, backup had arrived and some other police officers got Adam out of there. They led the 3 downstairs and sent them off to jail. Mike and Steve were deeply disturbed by the whole exchange. It was only made worse when a couple months later, they found out that the 3 people on the wall were from some crazy cult out in the woods. They were trying to get Adam to join them. They preyed on him because they knew he had a past history of being mentally unstable. They were trying to scare him. He turned on all the water in an attempt to flush them out of his own home. To this day, Mike and Steve say that this was the most disturbing call they've ever been on. This one time when I was working a 12-hour overnight shift, I went out on a call for a suspicious person walking house to house, knocking on doors, and saying things to people through their doors or to their doorbell cameras. I arrived to the man's house who called it in, and he explained better in person that it was a middle-aged woman with long, wiry hair holding something behind her back, going door to door yelling at people to open up and mumbling to herself. The man who called the police had a Ring doorbell camera, and so he showed me the footage that it caught. The woman came up to the door, looked at the camera for a few minutes, literally, then pressed the button. She started speaking into the mic of the doorbell, and the homeowner started talking back through his phone, starting by asking who she is and what she wants. She kept saying, "Open the door, she needs blood," and would smile and cackle each time she said it. When he threatened to call the police, she laughed and started basically punching the door and trying to remove the Ring doorbell camera from the wall. It was impossible to tell if the threat of calling the police is what eventually got her to leave. But when she did, the man saw that she went to the house next door. This was when he actually called 911. The footage was absolutely bone-chilling. It was like a scene from a scary movie, and it wasn't possible to tell what she was holding behind her back because of the creepy way she backed away from the door to the sidewalk, still facing the doorbell camera the entire time. There were 2 or 3 other units on this now, driving around the area trying to find the woman. It was basically a mini manhunt now, and the description being used was possibly armed and dangerous woman. I checked the nearby houses on foot really quickly, then got back in my car and started patrolling the area as well. None of us could find the woman, and then we got a report of a breaking and entering nearby. Someone had called 911 to report that someone had entered their house with a weapon, and the caller was hiding in their bedroom upstairs. The caller also had a doorbell camera and was able to see the woman entering the house through the front door, but not before looking into the camera for a few moments again. I arrived to the house just about the same time as another unit. Entering the house was easy as the front door was left unlocked, of course.
We had to enter with caution though, with guns drawn, because we didn't know how dangerous this woman was, or what she could be armed with. As we entered and the foyer was clear, another officer and I shouted that the police were here, and we ordered the intruder to come out with her hands up. Then there was a scream for help from upstairs. My adrenaline was rushing, as it does in any situation like this involving armed suspects. We ran up the stairs and followed the screams for help. They led us to the master bedroom. The husband unlocked and opened the bedroom door as we got upstairs, the husband of the couple sitting and hiding in there. They hadn't left the bedroom since the woman had entered the house, and they said she had been clawing and banging at the door only a few minutes ago, and that they didn't hear her leave, let alone even go down the stairs. We had to check every other room in the upstairs for her, and in one of the corner bedrooms, in the pitch blackness, we heard a cackling sound. Not being able to see her, but to hear her, was downright spine-chilling. I flicked on the light to the bedroom, and she was there sitting on the bed, already looking at me and smiling. She had a huge knife in her hand, and there was blood soaking the bed sheets that she was sitting on. It was her blood. She had just cut one of her wrists. She started saying exactly what she was saying on the first guy's doorbell camera, that she needs blood. We didn't know who she meant, until noticing the little doll sitting between her legs. It was a little girl's doll, covered in the woman's blood. We yelled at her to drop the knife with our guns drawn on her. She just laughed and kept saying what she was saying. There was clearly something very wrong with her, and reasoning with her didn't seem like it would be possible, but we tried anyway. I asked her who is this she keeps referencing, and tried to talk nice to her, saying she doesn't have to hurt herself or anybody else, and that we're there to help her. But as she continued to stare at us, mainly at me, and laugh and keep muttering barely understandable sentences, I got increasingly nervous. I had my gun aimed at the giant knife in her hand, contemplating shooting it out of her hand, considering if that was a viable, safe option, but neither of us were expecting what happened next. The crazed woman sprang off the bed and made this growling sound as she was about to lunge at me and presumably attack me, as her knife was raised in the air. I reacted the only way I could in the moment, and I shot at her twice, both times hitting her in the arm, as even though I was still trying to have my sight aimed on the knife, I wasn't expecting her to just jump up suddenly. She dropped the knife and started to scream and cry as she grabbed her arm. We took this moment to subdue her and place her in cuffs. We had to get her an ambulance immediately before she'd bleed out. From the hospital, she'd later be transported to a local jail, and she was later found not guilty on all charges by reason of insanity. She's currently a patient at a mental asylum in my city. The horror that every party involved in this incident had to go through was unimaginable. From all the people who were scared to open their doors to a crazed woman welding something unknown behind her back, to the couple that actually almost fell victim to her in their own house, to myself and the other officer that were on the scene before she was in custody. It was the scariest experience of my 10 years being a police officer.
Halloween 2016. My three friends and I, who for the purpose of this story will be named J, K, and L respectively, were trick-or-treating downtown. Downtown was always a mob scene on Halloween only because the houses were so close together, meaning more candy for the amount walked. 10 o'clock was always the time things really started to die down, and by 10:30, we were really the only kids still out trick-or-treating. Only like 1 in 10 houses actually opened their doors this late, so we called it quits with the trick-or-treating and decided to just screw around. It was a Saturday night after all. As we called it quits with the trick-or-treating, a lone person in a clown costume was walking really, really slowly from the black fog in the distance. This was a legit clown costume too. The makeup was crazy. From the slit-mouth smile to the blood-filled boils, it was a scary costume. The four of us laughed and screamed in reaction, but ultimately walked away. We went to a park that was nearby to just goof around, make a mess with silly string and shaving cream and whatever.
We weren't the first, however. Strands of silly string littered the playground, as well as shaving cream smudged on the walls of a bathroom building in the park to spell out obscenities. We all hung out on the playground, but Jay pointed out to the dark horizon where two clowns were walking over to us, one of them the same clown from earlier. I didn't think it was possible, but the second clown was even more disturbing than the first. The first clown now seemed to be wielding some kind of long, spear-like object. They both approached us really, really slowly. The funniness of the situation quickly wore off as they got closer and closer. Then they started to charge us. We all ran in different directions. One of the two clowns was chasing me. Out the park and down the street I ran. I didn't know the area too well, but I did know how to get back to Elle's house. I ran all the way there. About halfway there, I lost the clown. I called Elle and told him I was in his backyard. He was out of breath, but he said he just lost one of the clowns and was on his way over now. I said I'd call Jay, and he said he'd call Kay. Luckily, Jay picked up on the first ring. He wasn't being chased, so he didn't sound as freaked out as Elle did. I told him to meet us at Elle's house. 10 minutes later, all four of us were in Elle's backyard, gathering our thoughts and discussing what just went down. We had a good laugh about it now that it was over as we ate some of the candies that we got. Kay went home, while me, Jay, and Elle hung out in the living room for a while. Lights off, TV on, playing some Xbox One party game. Jay looked out the window and then ducked, and told us to shh and turn off the TV. When we asked why, he said there was a clown out there. I didn't believe him, so I looked out the window. He screamed, "Don't," but it was too late. The clown standing outside of Elle's house looked right at me through the window. I shut the curtains and told Elle he wasn't lying. His parents weren't home, so going to his dad wasn't an option. Instead, we shut off the TV and went upstairs to Elle's bedroom. We looked out the window. The clown wasn't there anymore. Actually, we never saw either of the clowns again. But the next morning, Elle texted the three of us, saying he found a rubber clown nose on his backyard patio table. He said it was obviously placed there with intent to scare us, and mission accomplished because it worked. Luckily, that clown epidemic didn't last more than a month later. After that, it just became an old story. It was a school night Halloween. My mom and dad took my two twin brothers out trick-or-treating. I didn't have plans, so my parents kind of forced me to answer the door and hand out candies while they were gone. Since we live in a cul-de-sac on a dead-end street, we get next to no trick-or-treaters on Halloween, so every time the doorbell rang, I kind of jumped. I was in the living room watching TV, with the bucket of candies next to me on a small table. Butterfingers, the one and only candy my mom always got on Halloween for some reason. The doorbell rang, so I took the orange bucket and brought it to the door and opened it. There was someone in a scream mask and robe holding out a pillow sack. It didn't look like he got a lot of candy for the night, and given that the night was almost over and nobody was really coming to the house, and he was alone, which is always kind of sad, I gave him a bunch of candy. He walked away without saying thanks, which kind of made me feel bad, but it was honestly whatever. I stopped thinking about it as soon as I sat back down on the couch. The movie I was watching ended, so I started surfing the channels. During one of the brief moments of silence as the TV flipped from one channel to the other, I heard a thud and a bump come from downstairs near the back door. To better hear what it could have been, I turned the volume on the TV all the way down and went to the stairway. The back door was wide open. My heart started racing as I started to feel sick inside. I had forgotten to lock it when I went back there. The big question was if what I heard was the sound of the door opening or closing, and if someone was in the house. Naturally, I called down the stairway for my mom and dad, and then my twins' names. The silence from down in the dark den was creepy as hell. I was afraid to go down there. Unfortunately, there's no door to separate the main floor from the den stairway,
so sitting in the living room suddenly didn't seem very comfortable. I kept the TV on, but muted. I just felt safer with the extra light it provided. It took a while for some reason, but it finally hit me to call my parents and ask them to come home. My mom said they'd be home within half an hour. I told my mom I was scared that someone was downstairs because I heard something. She assured me that there was nothing and it was just my imagination. I hung up the phone and immediately heard the sound of wood foundation cracking under one of the carpeted steps to the den. I froze on the couch. Literally, I couldn't move a muscle, not even a finger. Then there was another crack. As silently as I could, I sat up from the couch into a half-crouched position, tiptoeing to the front door. But as I passed the couch that blocked the view of the den stairway from the living room, I saw something on the stairway. It was a scream mask, leering up from the stairs at me, but in a way where he was obviously not trying to get caught. The angle at which I saw the mask and the dark lighting made the sight so much more disturbing. When he saw me though, he went the other way, back into the darkness of the den. I locked myself in my room upstairs and called my mom again to tell her what happened. They cut their trip short and came home. Only when my parents got home did I feel safe to leave my room. My dad and I checked the whole den, every closet, every room. Luckily, there was no one. The moral of the story simply comes down to keeping your doors locked, because apparently this guy just helped himself through our back door.
My older brother was having a Halloween party. He was a sophomore in college. I was actually only in the 8th grade. Our parents weren't home all weekend, so he was taking advantage of the opportunity, I guess. He made it abundantly clear he didn't want me in the house during the party, but fortunately I already made plans to go trick-or-treating with 2 of my friends. We all agreed it would probably be our last year trick-or-treating, so we wanted to make it a good time. We started midday right after school, the prime time where most kids were out, most everyone answers their doors, and still had abundant supplies of candies. We each filled 2 bags of candy by dark, making stops at our houses in between to bring them home, of course. But we weren't done. We weren't satisfied yet. We needed another bag, of course. After eating dinner and resting at my friend's place for a while, we went back out with empty bags and flashlights. You'll find out why in a little bit. It was probably around 9 o'clock now. Getting candy was a bit slower by now since most buckets were empty and not everyone was answering their doors. An hour flew by because we were still having fun, though we didn't get much candy this time. By the time it was like 10:30 or 11, we stopped because it just seemed obnoxious to knock on people's doors this late. Everyone already went home because it was a Tuesday night, a work night and school night. But we already agreed we'd be skipping school the next day. We were all in the same homeroom and already knew nothing was going on at school tomorrow. So to us, the night was still young. So we went for a run to what locals called the Ghoul House. It was a house with some history. A couple got divorced after their child somehow died in the house, and then the wife moved out. A couple weeks later, the husband shot himself at the kitchen table. It's been fenced off ever since. Why the house hasn't been sold or torn down by now is beyond me. When we got there, we realized how scary the house was in the dark. It stood taller than the other houses, and it had a black fence surrounding the front yard, with overgrown bushes hugging it. The front gate was pretty easy to hop. The deviance of what we were doing just made it so much more thrilling. We walked around back just to be safe, hoping no neighbors would see us. The back windows were boarded up from the inside, and the back door had a table wedged up against it. Someone clearly tried really hard to keep people out, possibly a neighbor. Through teamwork, we were able to lift the table quietly from off the door and onto the grass. The door was missing a doorknob, and it pushed in relatively easily. We were inside, and it felt weird, felt uncomfortable,
and at the same time exhilarating. All of us had our flashlights, creating a decent amount of light in the otherwise pitch black building. We were in the back living area of the house, some kind of den. The wood floors were all creaky as hell, and everything seemed to have been untouched for years. It didn't seem like anyone ever really broke in there before. That room was clear of anything interesting, so we moved on to the kitchen. An archaic fridge sat in the corner. One of my friends opened it up, and immediately the room filled with a stale, rotten, plasticky type odor. The fridge had some old empty milk and orange juice cartons. That was about it. The whole kitchen smelled foul, so we got out of there quickly. Next was the living room, and this room was just creepy. Something about it, I don't know, it just made you think that any time you turned around, there'd be someone standing in one of the corners. One of my friends pointed his light up and said, "Look at that." There was a giant hole in the ceiling, which led right up to a room upstairs. As my other friend and I also shined our lights up there was a couple thumps from right above us. We all shut our lights. I got that horrible, painful feeling in my heart area from what I just heard. We all whispered very, very lightly that those were definitely footsteps. One friend whispered we should go up there, see what it was. My other friend and I said absolutely no way and started tiptoeing to the back door. But he was persistent. He didn't follow us. Instead, he went upstairs. He didn't even make a good effort at being quiet about it. We kind of felt like we had to wait for him down in the living room now, so we stayed put. We heard his footsteps upstairs now, crossing the upstairs of the house, until he stopped right above us. My eyes were adjusted to the dark by this point, so even without our flashlights on, I was able to see the figure of my friend, standing above us, looking down through that hole in the ceiling. I tried whispering up there loud enough so that he could hear, but apparently he couldn't. I didn't want to get any louder, but suddenly we heard footsteps coming from the stairway in the living room. We both turned on our flashlights and shined them up to the top of the staircase to see our other friend walking down the stairs. The realization set in immediately, and neither of us had the balls to shine our lights up to that hole in the ceiling to see who was actually standing there. I just screamed run, and we all booked it to the back door, out the house, and to one of my friend's house. The friend who went upstairs said he smelled something foul up there, like a rotting carcass, and that he also heard breathing coming from one of the rooms. To this day, we have no idea who was in that house, but it seemed unlikely that it was just another curious wanderer, given how boarded up the house was. To say the least, we don't go there anymore.
I'll never forget this night. The pizza place I worked at was about to close, and I was getting ready to go home when the phone rang. I was working the counter alone that night, so I was taking calls. I picked up the phone. There was complete silence, so I hung up. About a minute later, the phone rings again, so I pick up again. Still silence. I was about to hang up again when I heard the very weak and cold voice of an old woman on the other end. She said she wanted a regular pie delivered. I remained polite on the phone, but on the inside I was screaming. I just wanted to get home and end my shift. I called out to my boss that somebody is requesting a delivery. He told me I had to go. I was upset at first, but I realized it's another tip, and the old ones usually tip the most, so I decided it was okay. I took down the address and told her it would be there soon, but she had already hung up. I thought that was rude, but I ignored it and yelled to the chef that I needed one regular. My boss told me to just go home after the delivery as the place would be closed, so a little before 10 o'clock, I got in my car and put the address into my GPS. The house was 7 miles away. The GPS took me to the quiet side of town. I arrived to the house. It was a small, one-floor house on a very quiet and empty block. I took the pizza and walked up to the door and rang the doorbell. There were no lights on in the house. I hoped that she hadn't given me the wrong address. I rang the doorbell again. There was still no answer. I was about to give up when I turned my head and saw somebody standing at the window. I got a little freaked out and backed up at first, but I eventually got closer to the window to see the person. It was an old woman, probably in her late 70s. She was just staring at me with a blank expression. I yelled to her through the glass that I had her pizza. She didn't react to what I said, so I screamed it louder. A big smile ran across her face. Not a pleasant, genuine smile. It was a smile that sent chills down my spine. I still remember that exact face she made through the window. I decided that I was freaked out enough and got back to my car and set the pizza in the passenger seat. I had to text my boss about this. I shot him a quick text and started my car, ready to get the hell away. I looked to my right to get one more look, to see the woman standing right outside my passenger side window, giving me the same stare she had given me before. I put my car in drive and floored it down the street, not looking back. My boss never made me do a late night delivery again. This happened 4 years ago when I was still in high school. I was told to do my last delivery of my shift. I got in my car, which was a 1999 Camry, perfect for delivering pizzas. I GPSed the address on my phone. I live upstate in the country, so all pizza deliveries were long drives. I remember the sun was starting to set, so it was probably around 7 o'clock. I'd say after a good 15 minutes of driving through the foresty dirt roads, my GPS said I had arrived. It was an old little cottage-like house made almost entirely of wood. It was sitting all by itself in the middle of absolutely nothing but forest. The lawn was completely unkempt, as the grass was almost at knee height. I was used to this kind of thing, so I didn't think much of it. I took the pizza to the front door. There was no doorbell, so I knocked loudly on the door. Within 10 seconds, I heard the sound of footsteps hitting wood on the inside of the house. The footsteps made it to the door and stopped. I started to feel uneasy. I got the feeling that I was being watched. And that's when I noticed there was a peephole in the door. "It's the pizza guy," I called out. I heard a low, harsh-sounding voice on the other side of the door, telling me to bring the pizza out back. I didn't like the idea of going back there. Something didn't seem right. "Are you sure, sir?" I called out. He didn't answer my question. The sound of footsteps didn't move away from the door, so I had the feeling he was still watching me. I almost found myself walking back to my car, but I decided I didn't want any trouble with my boss. The last time I brought a pizza back, he gave me attitude, so I reluctantly walked through the uncut grass and around the small house to the back. I remember there was a shed and a little patio back there. In the patio, there was a table with 4 chairs surrounding it. In one of the chairs, facing away from me, I saw the head of somebody sitting in the seat. I began walking over and said, "Excuse me," but the person didn't even move an inch. "Excuse me," I said again louder. Then from behind me, I heard, "Psst, over here." I turned around to see a man poking his head out from the corner of the house, looking at me with a crazed smile. "Come over here, I want to show you something." I freaked out, turned around and ran around the house in the opposite direction, back to my car, for some reason still holding the pizza. I got in my car, started it, and got away from there. On my way back to the pizzeria, I pulled over to the side of the road and called the police. Eventually, I was informed that there was no sign of anybody having been in that house for a long time. I quit my delivery job a few days after that. I have no idea what would have happened to me had I gone up to that man, but to this day, I still wish I had just turned my head to see who or what was sitting in that patio chair. I was doing late night deliveries during this particular shift. When I worked this job, I lived in the Poconos. It was very rural up there. I often found myself driving down roads surrounded by nothing but trees, just like this night. Only it was dark and foggy this time. Driving down a shortcut to town that I had taken many times before, I slam on the brakes when I see somebody jump out from the bushes onto the road. The sickening bump and thump from the front of the car confirmed that I had hit the person. I put my hand to my forehead, cursing to myself. I couldn't believe what just happened. I just hit a person. I got out of my car and checked to see if they were alright. It was a man wearing a black hoodie with the hood up. He lay motionless by my car tire. I had no idea what to do. At this point I was panicking. Why the hell was this guy in the middle of nowhere? Why did he jump in front of my car? And then things got weirder. I can hear a scream for help, coming from the woods to the left of me. Somebody was in trouble. I looked at the man I hit with my car. He was still on the ground, motionless. I'd only be gone for a minute, I figured. For whatever stupid reason, I thought it was okay to leave the man behind, to go into the woods. I moved in the direction I heard the scream originally, hoping to hear another, but it was just total silence except for the night creatures making their sounds. "Where are you?" I yelled out. It was at that moment I heard the sound of a foot crushing the leaves on the ground. I turned in the direction of the sound, and even in the dark and foggy weather, I could still make out the figure of somebody hiding behind a tree opposite me. I ran as fast as I could back to my car, looking back constantly to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I got back to my car, the man I had hit was gone. I didn't stick around to wonder where he went. I just got back in my car and proceeded down the road. My heart was racing the whole drive through, but I still ended up delivering the pizza. I got to the house, and when I rang the bell, a middle-aged woman answered. After paying, I noticed that her eyes focused on something behind me, and then she asked me, "They let you guys have delivery partners now?" I was confused and asked her what she meant, and she told me, "You got someone with you in your car." I felt a pain in my stomach as I turned and saw somebody sitting in the backseat of my car. I called the cops using the woman's phone, and they arrived shortly after, but the person in the backseat of my car was already gone. The scariest thing about this whole story, the police found a blood-stained knife on the floor of my car where the man was hiding. This memory still haunts me every day, and I can genuinely tell you, it's painfully scary just to imagine how things could have turned out if I hadn't made the delivery.
I was 16 in my junior year of high school. I had 9 periods in a school day. 5th period was lunch, and straight from there was my astronomy class. My astronomy class was actually held in one of the 2 basement classrooms of the school. My high school was big, there were 3 floors, and even that wasn't enough to accommodate all the classes offered, so the school built 2 classrooms in the basement. It was honestly kind of creepy down there when nobody else was around. It used to be a janitorial area, however it was remodeled to better resemble a typical hallway. The only thing, there were no intercoms or loudspeakers down in the basement at that time. For that reason, no classes were held down there first period for the morning announcements. Everyone referred to this little section of the basement as the chamber, and everyone always tried to get classes down there just because it was air conditioned and the classes were typically easier. Plus it had its own bathroom down there. We had a quiz in astronomy that day. Usually I was one of the first done just because I found the class easy.
After I finished my quiz, I texted my friend who was in the other basement classroom to meet me in the bathroom because I was bored. He told me okay. I walked out of the classroom and down the small hallway to the bathroom. A few seconds later, the door opened and my friend JJ entered the bathroom. We were joking around for a while until JJ checked his phone and said someone texted him saying the school was going on lockdown. We both looked at each other with the same grins. Neither of our teachers saw us leave the classrooms. That meant we had free range of the school while it was on lockdown. We agreed to sneak upstairs and look around the hallways just for the hell of it. The worst that would happen is that we'd explain how we couldn't hear the announcements in the basement classrooms. Upon opening the basement door to the main floor, we were surprised to find all the lights had been turned off, so the hallways were pretty much pitch black aside from the light pouring in from the doors in the lobby. This was legit because usually the lights were left on in the hallways during lockdowns. Something was going down, and we didn't know if we were even comfortable walking around now. JJ stepped out a little further into the hallway, and I followed suit. JJ then looked down the hall and said, "Who's that?" I looked, and emerging from the darkness was a man. At first we couldn't tell if he was a teacher or not, but as he got closer, we realized this guy wasn't dressed at all like any staff member. He was dressed like a bum. "Alright, let's go," I told JJ as we hurried back down to the basement. He surely saw us, whoever he was. We saw both classrooms had their doors shut and lights off, so to avoid making a scene, we decided to hide in the bathroom. I shut the light first thing and then we both went to hide in the corner stall. There was complete silence in the room, no ventilation, no heaters, nothing. Just the sound of me and JJ breathing, and an occasional drip from the sink. The door to the bathroom suddenly opened, and light from the hallway poured into the bathroom for a brief moment. The door shut, and the bathroom was once again pitch black. Me and JJ tried our best to control our breathing. The room was so silent that we could hear somebody walking over to our side of the bathroom. The person stopped and started breathing really heavily, as if they were out of breath. Me and JJ were both scared to death. JJ did something very dumb. He whispered in my ear, "We have to crawl out through the other stalls." The room was so silent, however, that even JJ's whisper could be heard from across the room. The heavy breathing outside the stall stopped, and the person tried pressing the stall door in. That was when I whispered, "Go, go," to JJ. We both crawled under the side wall to the next stall over, and then the next stall, and then finally out to the other side of the bathroom. The person was now full on banging on the stall door. Me and JJ hopped up off the floor, opened the door, and as the light filled the room again, we saw the guy from upstairs in the corner. We pounded on the door to JJ's class. The teacher let us in within seconds. JJ explained everything as the teacher locked the door, mentioning a gun sticking out of the man's pocket. I was shocked to hear this because I didn't see a gun, but I went along with it anyway. Usually a bunch of high school students would be laughing their asses off at two students causing a scene like this, but I noticed all the kids sitting in the corner looked concerned. A sudden bang at the door made everyone jump and a couple of girls squeal out of fear. JJ, the teacher, and I could see the man standing at the door, looking through the window while trying the doorknob. After a few bangs on the door out of what seemed to be anger, he turned and walked down the hallway back to the stairs. We don't know how much longer the lockdown went on for, but for over an hour we sat in silence in the room, other than the teacher occasionally asking me and JJ questions in a very concerned tone, shaking his head after everything we would tell him. Eventually, somebody from upstairs called the teacher and he instructed all of us to single file walk up the stairs and out of the building, where we would be greeted by cops. Me and JJ did the best we could at describing the man to the cops and to the dean. One of the cops patted me on the back and we were sent off to go home. After this incident, the school installed cameras everywhere and ramped up the security budget. This incident never got media attention, so honestly, we never found out if police caught the guy. I'm convinced that man had no other intentions but to kill us then and there in that bathroom stall. I'm a retired New Jersey police officer. Throughout my 20 years in the force, the most disturbing call I ever received was for a school lockdown happening at a nearby middle school, of which I'll leave out the name for legal reasons. It happened on a stormy, dark day. My car number was called on the radio to respond to a lockdown, where a suspicious-looking man was seen stepping out from a white van parked behind a school and walking into the back door by the boys' locker room. I pulled up to the back parking lot of the school, right next to the white van. Nobody was inside and all the doors and trunk were locked. I opened the red back door that entered into the gym hallway, right by the locker rooms. The main lights had been turned off, so the whole inside of the school was dark. I unholstered the flashlight from my belt and used it to navigate the halls. I made it to the lobby of the school, where a woman emerged from the front office quietly, telling me to check the boys' locker room, but to be careful because the person might be armed. I called for backup on my radio and was assured backup was already on the way. I made it back to the hallway I entered from, where I found the boys' locker room right next to the exit. I pushed it open very quietly. There were no windows in the rooms, therefore there was no light whatsoever in that locker room, only the light provided by the flashlight. There was a white noise in the room, some kind of vent on the ceiling blowing air, but even over that, I was hearing faint scratching type noises or little dings on the locker doors from the other side. I was supposed to make my presence as a police officer known, but honestly, I was just too scared. The tension in the room was insane. I held my flashlight in one hand and my gun in the other as I snuck to the other side of the locker room. It seemed like wherever I was in the room, the dings and thuds would be coming from the other side. I was standing in the corner of the locker room, right by the door to the bathroom, when the sound of someone slamming a locker door from another room made me jump out of my skin. I went in the direction where I heard the slam, to find out that it was from the boys' football team locker room. There was no door separating the main locker room from the football locker room. The lockers in here were also 3 times the size. I finally had the nerve to make my presence known by shouting police. After shouting, a kid started screaming help from somewhere in the room. It was very muffled though. The kid pounded on a locker door on the other side of the row I was in. When I found out that the boy was trapped inside of a locker, I felt sick in my stomach. I told him I'd be right back, once again calling for backup while running outside to where the white van was. It was gone. My biggest mistake was not getting the plate number first thing. I told dispatch to be on lookout for a suspicious white van. I ran back into the school and instructed the staff in the front office to end the school day and to send somebody with a key to the locker room to get the boy out of the locker. The boy was held by the man with a knife on his back, as I speculate the man was quietly trying to get the 12-year-old boy to his van. The boy was bleeding on his arm from the man cutting him while resisting. The man's van was spotted a week later in a 7-Eleven parking lot, where he was arrested after being properly identified. I was staying in a Hampton Inn in New Jersey when I was visiting Rowan University, a college I potentially wanted to attend. My family couldn't come with me, so I was on my own. After attending campus tours, I went to get a bite to eat at a nearby restaurant, and then went back to the hotel at around 8 p.m., planning on going back to campus again the next day. About an hour after returning to my room, a strange alarm started going off in my room, along with a white light flashing from the corner of the ceiling. A message started looping shortly after as well, saying something along the lines of, "All Hampton Inn guests, please remain in your rooms, this is a lockdown." I'd never heard of a lockdown in a hotel. I never even knew hotels had alarms like this. I found it more interesting and exciting than anything else. Eventually the sound of the alarm stopped, but the light kept flashing, and every 20 seconds or so the message would repeat. It was only like 9:30, so I turned on the TV just as background noise while I started changing clothes and brushing my teeth. I shut the lights when I was done and hopped under the covers. I watched TV for half an hour before shutting it off. The light was still flashing with an obnoxious bright white every few seconds. It was definitely going to hinder my sleep. I was starting to consider calling the front desk to ask what was going on, when the phone rang. It was someone from the front desk. I was expecting them to tell me something about the alarm and when it would shut off, but instead the person on the other end spoke in a very concerned voice. She told me to remain calm and walk out the door. I took that opportunity to ask her what exactly was going on. She went on to tell me that there was somebody in the room with me and to get out immediately. I dropped the phone and instinctively started looking around everywhere. Part of me was curious to see if somebody was in fact in the room. I checked under the bed, looked into the empty bathroom, nobody in either spots. Then I noticed the closet door right next to the bathroom. It was one of those closets with a wooden sliding door. It was open just a tiny crack, and through that tiny crack, I could see a person's face. At first, it didn't sink in what I was seeing, but when the door slid shut, that was when I freaked out and ran out the door. The people at the front desk showed me security footage from an hour earlier of some sketchy-looking man walking around the hallways, apparently looking for a certain room. When he got to my door, he opened it with the card he somehow acquired, and that was it. I stayed around as the authorities took the person out in chains. It was a man, of course, on the shorter side, easily 40s. He looked at me as he passed, as if he knew who I was immediately. It's scary thinking back that he may have been watching me for more than an hour from that closet. A couple weeks ago, my dad came home and pitched me a small job offer. One of his coworkers was going away for a few days and needed somebody he could trust to watch over his house. The reason my dad pitched this to me was because the man's house has a big CCTV system, basically a camera in every room, and then an operating desk where all screens could be watched on a big monitor. And I'm a computer science major, so my dad just always assumes that I know how to work anything technological. The man told my dad that he'd pay me $200 for the 2 days just to watch the house. Whatever that meant. My dad drove me to the house and introduced me to the man, whose name doesn't matter. The man made it seem like he preferred I stay in the upstairs room with the monitors as opposed to roaming the house all day. That was fine with me though. So when I wasn't eating, I was mostly just sitting in that room with the TV on in the background, and doing schoolwork on my laptop. Ironically, the thing I was doing the least was keeping an eye on the monitors. Night came. I started wondering where in the house I should sleep, since surprisingly, we hadn't discussed that. So I sat back down at the desk and looked at all the different rooms on the screens to see which rooms had beds or couches. I noticed something I wasn't expecting to notice though. The back screen door was open downstairs. I didn't remember it being open. I looked through each and every camera screen in a panic. In the living room, a closet door was open. This one I knew wasn't open earlier. I texted my dad to call the man and ask him if he came back home. Meanwhile, I continued watching the screen. On the grainy, dark image, a tall person who resembled only a black shadow on the screen stepped out from the closet. I pulled my arms off the desk as I covered my mouth with my hands in shock. As I did this, however, my left elbow pulled some heavy object from the desk onto the floor, creating a big thud. The person in the image very clearly moved their head up to the ceiling as a response to the noise. They went for the stairs, walking up very, very slowly, step by step. Meanwhile, I got a text back from my dad saying, "No, he's not. I just spoke to him half an hour ago. Why?" I got so caught up in my phone texting my dad to send help that I didn't even pay attention to the monitor. There was a knock at the door. I looked at it and then the screens. The first screen I laid my eyes on was the one showing the person outside the door to the room I was in. When I remembered that door had no lock, the only thing I could think to do was jump out the window into the bushes below. I ran halfway down the block and then stopped when my dad called me. I had him call his friend and ask him if he was expecting somebody in the house. The man said he had no relatives or friends who had his key or would ever let themselves into his home. So he called the cops and had them review the footage. I got to watch all of it, and it showed everything. From the moment the intruder broke the glass to the backyard door, to the moment I jumped out the window and him running away shortly after. The intruder was never found. The footage was just too dark to identify his face. One day I agreed to house sit for a friend just for the night. He and his family were going on a short vacation and needed somebody to watch their pets and house. I agreed to do it for a small amount of money. I'd been to his house many times before, so I was familiar with the layout. Nothing eventful happened at all the entire day. I just fed the 2 cats, the fish, and the birds. I went to sleep on the couch in the sunroom because it was my favorite room in their house. It was a tiny room surrounded by windows with a big TV mounted on the wall. I fell asleep with the TV on, but I woke up not long after. I turned it off, and now the room was dark. I tried to go back to sleep, but I thought I heard the sound of the PVC gate closing outside. I thought it might have just been the wind. The room had windows surrounding it in 3 directions, so I was basically looking around in a circle out into the darkness. I sat back down on the couch when I calmed down, but I heard a leaf crunching outside. That's when I knew someone was out there. I took another look outside. There was literally somebody pressed up against the glass to the window behind the couch. They were looking in, but I didn't know if they could see me or not. I yelled as loud as I could at them to fuck off. I'm not a big dude, but whoever this guy was appeared to be, so I wasn't going out there. Shockingly, this didn't scare the person away. In fact, they walked over to the back door and tried the doorknob. I ran to get the phone, and then I yelled into the sunroom, "I'm calling the police." Thankfully, this worked. He ran off. I didn't actually call the cops, though. Instead, I texted my friend just to let him know of an almost break-in. I slept through the night in an upstairs bedroom, locked. The next morning, my friend's family returned to find all of the tires on their sedan that was left behind had been slashed. We speculated that somebody who had it out for their family and knew of the vacation they were taking had some kind of plan to break in. But when that failed, they settled for this. That's just speculation, but still, it's the least terrifying explanation to me. When I was in college, I used to work as a babysitter on the side to make a little extra cash. One day I saw an ad posted in the library that was requesting a house sitter for the weekend and to inquire through phone. I was used to babysitting, but house sitting sounded even better, same thing minus taking care of kids. So I called the number as soon as I got home and spoke with a guy named Chuck. I met him that Friday and he showed me around the house. He and his wife eventually went on their way, and I was left alone in the house. I was given one of the spare upstairs bedrooms. I say one of because there were a few. The house was huge. Nothing out of the ordinary was going on at all for the whole day. It was quite uneventful, and I felt like I was missing out on going out since it was a Friday night. But I kept reminding myself that I'd be making $200 for the whole weekend. Later in the night, I kind of just laid in the guest bed that I'd be sleeping in and watched a movie on demand. I wondered why this couple felt the need to hire somebody to watch their house for the whole weekend. There weren't any pets or anything after all. Though it was a very, very nice house, so it seemed the most obvious that they just wanted a sense of security for their house while they were gone. By the time I turned off the TV, I was shot and probably minutes away from falling asleep. But the slight sound of a click, along with a sudden glow in the room, woke me completely. I opened my eyes fully to see light creeping out from under the crack of a door. It took me a second to realize that it was a closet door. I flipped on my side as my heart started beating 200 beats a minute. I pulled the sheets up to my chin and pretended to be asleep. I was certain someone was in that closet, and I was simply too afraid to get out of that bed and make any noises. Words can't describe my fear in that bed, or how with each passing minute I felt more and more like I could possibly die. The closet door opened, I could hear it, but I could not see it as I was facing the opposite way. I closed my eyes and tried my best not to move. The room went dark again as I heard another click, a bit louder this time. The closet door quietly closed in the background, but I didn't hear anything else. I was afraid that whoever it was went back into the closet. I didn't know what to do because they had to have seen me and I didn't want to run for it in fear of being chased. The room was dead silent as I was thinking over my next course of action. Eventually, I decided to just peek over to the other side and make sure the coast was clear. I flipped on my other side. Someone was standing right next to the bed, with their hand reaching towards me. My reaction, I pulled my arms up towards me, balled up, and backed up onto the wall in shock. The person stood there showing no signs of leaving. I hopped over the metal bar at the end of the bed, ran for the door, down the stairs, and then out the front door. I ran all the way home, let myself in, called Chuck, and explained. I told him it was his problem now and hung up. He tried calling back, but I didn't answer. Maybe there was some story to be told, like they knew this person, or they frequently dealt with break-ins and that's why they needed me. I didn't care though. I didn't even care about the money. I just didn't want to speak to that Chuck guy ever again, or see that house ever again.
Attention, lockdown, lockdown, lock the doors, stay away from the windows.
Back in 2016, my school went into a lockdown. I was in my senior year and it was the last week of school, so everything was kind of chill and laid back at that point. My friend, who we all used to call Moose, was cutting class with me to smoke in my car in the senior parking lot. One of our friends, Mario, who was in the lunchroom, texted me to come chill with him, so Moose and I started walking back to the school. As we were about to enter through one of the discreet back doors of the school by the band and chorus rooms, Mario texted me saying the school was going into lockdown, and he was right. As we entered through the still unlocked back door, we noticed the red lockdown lights flashing in the tiny band hallway. We walked through the empty hall. This was the quieter section of the school with less foot traffic since we were far from the regular classrooms. I was texting Mario asking him what was going on and if it was just a drill. Moose and I stood in the hallway waiting for an answer. My friend Mario texted back saying, "Dude, holy shit," and the 3 dots bubble meaning he was typing sat under his text for like 30 seconds. Then it went away. He didn't send a second text. I sent him 3 question marks. Moose and I didn't really know what to do. The main hallway lights were shut off, and all that lit up the halls were the backup lights and the red flashing lockdown lights. There were no teachers anywhere to tell us what to do, so we just chilled in the hallway. We tried opening the doors to the auditorium, but they had already been locked. Moose then tapped my shoulder and pointed down the hallway. All the way down, there was someone dressed in black fast approaching, like speed walking down the hall in our direction. At first it looked like a teacher, but as he got closer, we realized he was wearing some kind of white mask. Moose and I started walking backwards instinctively in response to what we now perceived to be a threat. As he got even closer, we could confirm it was a mask on his face. And it was this horrifying, disgusting mask of some pale, rotting-like face. I'd never seen anything so creepy at any Halloween stores or anything. The man was now too close for comfort, and the way he was approaching us was obviously full of aggression. Moose and I turned and started running back towards the band room. We hoped the band teacher, Miss Bryant, would be in there to let us in. We got to the door, which was locked, and started pounding on it, but we didn't have time to wait. Moose and I split up to hide. I hid in one of the music department closets. I don't know where Moose went. I turned the light in the closet off and hid behind a big container. There was a big glass window in the door to the closet, and I could see into the hall thanks to the little light from the backup lights. I heard footsteps approaching from outside, so I ducked my head completely behind the container. I only looked up and peeked at the window after the footsteps had stopped for a while, and I assumed it was clear. But it was not. The footsteps stopped because the man in the mask was standing at the door, looking in through the glass. I ducked back down, hoping he didn't see me, and then the closet door creaked open. It sounded as though he was trying to fiddle for the light switch, couldn't find it, then gave up. I heard footsteps quickly walk away, matching his speed walking pace from just before. I took out my phone to text Moose to see if he was alright, and I saw I had a long text from Mario. He explained that a student was stabbed in the bathroom by some masked man with a blade. Moose also texted me saying he's alright. He ran back outside to his car. I realized that was a good idea. I made sure the coast was clear and booked it for my car as well. I sat in my car in front of the school and watched as cop cars swarmed the place. At least 10 officers entered the building. Moose came to sit in my car with me, and we watched for over half an hour. The school was let out early, with police escorting the kids out, of course. They never even found the masked man in the school. He likely escaped through one of the back doors. There were helicopters searching all day for the man. I'm pretty sure he was never found. I thank my lucky stars I didn't have a similar fate as that kid in the bathroom. I went to a very poor high school in a bad neighborhood. Because of that, we regularly had fire drills and lockdown drills in the case of something happening. During a lockdown, the teacher would turn off the lights and we'd all hide in a corner of the classroom without saying anything. It was a cold day in the third quarter of the school year. The windows were all shut, obviously, but still, my teacher had to stop mid-sentence because we could all hear some kind of shouting outside. Definitely some kind of commotion. My teacher went to the window, looked outside, then opened one of the windows, but the yelling seemed to stop by the time he did. At the same time, the dean started speaking over the loudspeaker and said we were going into a lockdown. My teacher rushed to shut the door and turn off the lights, and we all did our thing, went to the corner of the room. Time seemed to move slow as we were all huddled in that corner. Screams started coming from the hallway. Not the screams of students, but deranged, angry screams from a grown man, familiar to the screaming we briefly heard from outside. Someone dangerous was in the building, clearly. The school I went to didn't have security guards, it was too poor, so literally in a case like this, we'd have to wait for police to arrive. The screams were then accompanied by bangs on a nearby door, another classroom. We could hear the screams of the kids in the room next to us. The banging stopped. The screaming grew closer until it was right outside our door, and then bangs on our classroom door. A couple kids screamed and started to cry. The sick man on the other side of the door banged and banged. He started hitting the glass with his elbow, I think, as he screamed insane things that made no sense to us. Some of it being, "I'm sick of it," and "just stop already." The sickening sound of the small, thin glass window of the door shattering made the reality of the situation sink in even worse. Of course, kids on either side of me were screaming and crying now. Me, I was just sitting there in total shock. The man on the other side of the door stuck his arm into the room through the thin window opening and tried unlocking the door. My teacher took that opportunity to grab a pair of scissors and literally stab the man's arm. The man cried out in pain, banged on the door a few more times even harder now, and started running down the halls, still crying in what was probably a mix of pain and anger. The lockdown was ended a few minutes after police arrived. There had to be at least 6 cop cars outside. And yes, the crazy sicko man was arrested and probably brought to a mental hospital. The man apparently wasn't armed, but he clearly came into the school with intentions of hurting people. Kids, mind you. I went to a school in California. We always had a lockdown drill once a month, but only one time ever was it not a drill. I was in the cafeteria during my lunch period when the teacher, who was in charge of watching the lunchroom, announced over the microphone for everyone to be quiet. He announced to us that the school was going into lockdown and ordered us to be quiet. I think he genuinely scared everyone by how serious and nervous he sounded, because everyone in the cafeteria looked genuinely shook and actually shut up. I looked around the disturbingly quiet cafeteria and could see everyone else was doing the same thing, taking nervous, curious glances at their friends and strangers at other tables. Then shit went down. A gunshot echoed from across the school, and that's when panic set in with everyone. Some kids ran for the exit door. The teacher in charge of the cafeteria yelled at everyone to hide under the tables as he locked the cafeteria doors and shut off the lights. I was sitting under the table with my friends, heart racing, feeling sick, knowing my life could be in danger. Every minute felt like an eternity, just waiting for someone on the intercom to say it's all clear. Then, across the cafeteria, there was a sudden outroar of screams from students, mostly girls, and the sound of tables and chairs being moved or falling over. My friends and I looked out from under the table, and we saw a kid with a gun outside the locked door of the cafeteria. Then I remember hearing gunshots. He was shooting at the glass door. The glass didn't shatter right away. I don't even know if it did at all, but the entire lunchroom cleared out through the two side exit doors to the outside. Students of all ages either ran to their cars or off the school property and into the neighborhood streets. I ran in the direction of the front of the school, also the direction of my house. I saw police cars already outside. I think they had just arrived at that point, but I didn't stick around to watch. I got home and told my parents, and my dad turned on the news to see the shooting was already being talked about. Miraculously, only one girl was wounded, and the police somehow apprehended him without killing him. I'm sorry for anyone else who has to go through something like this. Fearing for your life that much is not something anyone should have to go through.
Late October, my girlfriend Stacy and I took a road trip to Stowe, Vermont. We rented a cabin on the website Glamming Hub, only about a 20-minute ride from the village. It was on a nice hilltop with a view of the fall foliage, which was just the reason why we took this trip. We had the rental from Thursday night to Sunday. The cabin had a code lock system. The owner sent me the combination before we arrived, and it worked seamlessly. Stepping in, we looked around the place, and it was nice and cozy. Literally everything was made of wood, and it had this very old-fashioned country feel. It even had this distinct smell that just reminded us of, well, I guess a country log cabin. There was a bathroom, a small kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and a living room. It was plenty of space for the two of us. There were 2 TVs, one in the master bedroom and one in the living room. There was this other door that was locked though, which we presumed led to the 3rd bedroom that was listed on the ad. Though we didn't know why it would be locked, it wasn't a big deal at all, and we presumed the owner had some personal stuff in there. Plus, he knew it would only be us 2. We put most of our luggage in the 2nd bedroom so that we could leave the master bedroom nice and neat. Since we arrived pretty late on Thursday, we went straight out to dinner in town. Then we walked around the village for a little bit before returning to the cabin. By then it was late, so we called it a night after a movie. The next day was a cloudy, chilly one. We went out to hike along some dirt trails in the woods near the cabin, which was very peaceful. Upon returning to the cabin, I showered and changed out of my hiking attire and into more appropriate attire for hitting a nice restaurant. When I got out from the shower, Stacy told me she heard something in the bedroom with a locked door. She said it sounded like a radio or recording. I went up to the door and put my ear up on it to try and listen, but it was silent on the other side. I knocked on the door to the dismay of Stacy.
She told me to stop because the idea of me knocking on the door trying to see if someone was in there freaked her out. To be honest, I slightly did it for that reason, just to tease her. While Stacy was in the shower, I was sitting in the living room watching whatever I could find on the TV. That's when I thought, just barely, I heard the slightest sound from inside that room. I muted the TV and went to put my ear over the door again. I did hear this slight speaking noise, like it could be from a radio. I messaged and then called the host and told him about it. He said he wasn't sure why his wife would have locked the door, but that she may have left some of her stuff in there. He said as for the speaker noise, he'd have to ask his wife. Stacy and I went out for lunch after her shower. I didn't tell her about hearing the noise as well because I didn't want to creep her out, and it was obvious to me the guy's wife just left an electronic device in there or something. We went to this restaurant on Main Street in town called Harrison's. After that, we just took a drive around the area, then stopped at a park and relaxed for a bit. That's when the host called me and said that his wife told him she didn't lock anything in there, so he's not sure why that is or what we could be hearing. He offered to come by and unlock the door and check it out, to which I said sure. So with that, we headed back to the house. It was about a 20-minute drive back. When we got back, Stacy let herself in and collapsed on the couch, tired from, I guess, eating and walking around. I listened into the room again, and I still heard the same sounds from before. I said, "Hang on, I'll be right back," to Stacy as I walked outside. I didn't know why I didn't think of doing this sooner. I went to the window to the bedroom with the locked door. There were no curtains or anything blocking the view inside. As I stood on my tiptoes to look into the room, I was horrified. I saw this grossly skinny, tall, 20-something-year-old guy in a hood dancing slowly in the center of the room. He had what looked to be a small radio in his hand. He noticed me quickly at the window, and he stopped and looked at me, smiling. I started screaming Stacy's name, yelling, "Get out of the house." She met me at the door, panicked and confused. I told her just get in the car. I grabbed our 2 bags, leaving whatever stray items behind, and threw them in the trunk, driving off. I then called the host and told him to call the cops because someone was in the house. An hour later, while we were sitting in town, I got a call back from the host who said police arrived and the 3rd bedroom was opened and no one was in there. However, they found multiple empty bags of chips under the bed, implying someone was in fact in there. We went back to collect our remaining belongings and worked out a refund between the host and the website. Of course, we didn't stay there after that. We went to a nearby motel and stayed till Sunday, then we went home. I'll tell you though, what I saw through that window, that dancing skinny figure, I couldn't sleep for nights, especially with the thought that he was in there the entire time we were, even while we were asleep. It happened after a long Friday night halfway through October, a rainy one, and drinks were involved. I was at this Halloween-themed housewarming party with all my friends. I didn't wear a costume because I came straight from work already pretty exhausted. I took an Adderall to wake myself up before going, and I stopped at a gas station to pick up some White Claws. There were a decent amount of people there, I'd say 25 to 30. I had to meet a few people that I'd never met before. All this socializing and drinking was keeping me awake, but deep down I kind of wanted to just get home and go to bed. Working in a hospital means I get crazy hours and my sleep schedule's all over the place. I eventually saw a good opportunity to do an Irish goodbye through the backyard. I didn't even really have it in me to say goodbye to 20 people. I really shouldn't have driven home with alcohol in my system, and I don't recommend anybody ever do that. Always call an Uber. I ran through the rain and got in my Subaru and just started to drive. No music on, I wasn't in the mood. I just wanted peace and quiet, to listen to the rain hitting the windshield. Then, driving down some quiet residential road, I spotted a girl walking in the rain. No umbrella, no jacket, nothing. She stopped walking and looked at my car as I drove nearer to her. I definitely let out a sigh as I contemplated whether I should just keep going or not, and my more compassionate side told me to pull over. I rolled down my window and asked if she needed a ride. Without answering, she got in the back seat of my car. I asked her where she was going. She said just down to the end of this road, so that's where I took her. As I stopped at the second stop sign, I asked her why she's out in the rain. She said she was just in a hurry back and didn't want to call a cab. I said that's understandable, making a joke about how expensive cabs and Ubers are. I introduced myself as Jake, and she said, "Allie, thanks for picking me up." After that, no more words were exchanged. I continued down the street,
until I saw a dead end sign approaching. I stopped at the final sign, then asked, "Is it past the dead end sign?" She didn't answer. As I was halfway through that little intersection, I looked in the rearview mirror, and my heart sank. She wasn't in the reflection. I stomped on the brake and turned around. She wasn't in the back seat. I quickly pulled to the side of the road and got out. I hurried to check the entire backseat row. She wasn't there. Not on the seat, not on the floor. I looked down the empty road, lit up only by the occasional streetlight. There was no one in sight. But there was no possible way she even got out from the car, as I had not once heard the door either opening or closing, and there's no possible way she just snuck out from the car unheard. I was starting to question my sanity. I started feeling around the seat and floor where she sat. It was completely dry. It would have had to have been somewhat wet from her after being in the rain. I stood there in the rain, dumbfounded, confused, and scared. I looked around me again, and then I realized to the right of the car, right next to where I pulled over, was a fence, and beyond that fence was a cemetery. And her response to my question moments before dawned on me when I asked her, "Where are you going?" And she said, "Down to the end of this road." I looked at the cemetery, which was at the end of the road. Then I got back in my car and did a 3-point turn and hurried home. I don't think I was anywhere near drunk enough to be hallucinating shit.
Last October, my friends and I went to a haunted corn maze in Oak Hill, Ohio. It was supposed to be the best corn maze in our area. I want to leave the name out just out of respect for the family that runs it. I was with my friends Joe, Carl, and Cody. We always do haunted house type stuff every October. On the line to get into the attraction, we overheard some kids saying how last year the maze had to shut down for a night because some kid was actually hurt by one of the workers. We joined in on the conversation, and apparently someone dressed in one of the costumes actually pushed one of the customers, and they had to close for the night. I guess that added a little bit to the nerves, like that maybe we'd feel like the costume actors would actually go above and beyond just the typical jump scares. Once we got in, it felt like a normal corn maze. It started slow, then, the occasional actors would jump out from behind a corner or out of the crops. There were multiple speakers tucked away in the background, blasting spooky sound effects to add to the ambiance, and it overall was just littered with Halloween decorations and props everywhere. We came to this little split. There were 2 directions we could go, left and right, and there was a sign in the middle with 2 arrows. Left side said, "This way to safety," and the right side said, "Danger, keep out." So 2 and 2, we decided to split up. Cody and I went to the left, the safety side. As we walked, we expected it to be the opposite of safety, that this side would probably be the scarier side or have more jump scares. Well, it turns out that was right. Kind of. We turned this corner, and there was this guy in a costume just standing there holding a pumpkin. The costume was very bizarre. It was an all-black outfit with this weird blank mask over his face. It was a complete pullover mask, but it only had 2 eye holes. No mouth hole, not even holes for the nose. He didn't jump out or make any screaming noises. He just walked up to us holding up the pumpkin, motioning for us to take it. We kinda just laughed, thinking it was part of the gimmick. Then, in a deep, raspy voice, almost like how Batman speaks in the Dark Knight movies, like he were masking his voice, he said, "Take it, please." We looked at him continuing to laugh while moving forward, and he started to follow us, repeating himself over and over, saying, "Take it." Eventually it seemed like it was getting a little stale though, like the joke was over and he should have stopped and went back to his spot. But he kept following us for over a minute. He kept saying, "Take it, take it," his tone getting angrier sounding. Then he said, "Take it or I'll kill you." Now I didn't take that seriously, obviously, given that we were in a corn maze, but I did find it to be a little aggressive of a line. I took the pumpkin from him, and he seemed to stop following us. We continued walking until we bumped into Joe and Carl again at the point where the 2 separate paths merged, and they both laughed, asking why I was holding a pumpkin. I explained. Everyone agreed I should just take the pumpkin home with me at this point. Anyway, continuing on through the corn maze, it was a pretty traditional standard attraction after that. At one point though, one of the actors actually broke character and came up to me and said I can't steal the pumpkin. I told him one of the workers gave it to me, and he asked which one. I said the guy in the black with the white blank mask. He seemed confused and asked where the worker was. I told him on the left side of the fork in the path. He then walked in that direction, not saying anything. We all thought it was really weird and took us out of the immersion a little bit. Quickly after that, we made it to the end, and it was only then, when there was enough light, that I realized the pumpkin was carved on the inside, and the top of it was cut. I grabbed it by the stem and pulled off the top, expecting something to be in there. And oh, there was. On the bottom of the inside of the pumpkin. At first I didn't know what they were. To be honest, I thought they were some kind of food, till I picked one up. I realized it was a severed human finger, a very real one, and there were probably 9 more in there. On the side of the pumpkin was a pair of eyes drawn in black Sharpie, and under them said, "Always watching," with a smiley face next to it. My friends and I screamed and freaked out, and we ran to the nearest worker. She didn't know what to do either, as she was just as young as us. She called for one of her superiors, and he called the police. The whole attraction was shut down as police came and basically listened to our story. We stayed on the premises while police searched the place, but it was basically in the middle of nowhere, so he could have been anywhere. The police took the appendages for, I'm assuming, forensic analysis. I don't think a body was ever found to match the fingers. We left that place unharmed that night, but not without a permanently traumatizing experience.
I'm 24 years old, still living with my mom and dad, along with my 2 younger siblings. My parents bought a new house in March, just around the time coronavirus really started to be taken seriously around me, and quarantining started. So we were in the unpacking and settling in phase during all of this. My room is actually in the basement, which I don't mind. It's furthest away from my parents' room. It's technically just an extra room in the house, not really meant to be a bedroom, but we made it one. Plus, my parents figure I'm going to be moving out soon, so why give me one of the better rooms in the house? The basement in this house is huge. It's really cool, and I get to feel like it's kind of my own basement in a way because of my room. But right off the bat moving here, weird things would happen. Inside my room, mostly at night, I'd hear strange sounds inside the walls. I knocked on the wall, and it seemed to be hollow. There's a vent in the room. I thought maybe there was an animal in the vents. I used my iPhone flashlight to get a look inside, but I couldn't really see anything. Whatever, house noises, I figured. If it persisted, I would tell my dad to look into it. I set up my Xbox on the basement TV. In fact, I usually just chill in the basement instead of my room. I used the 50-inch TV my dad set up down there. One night on the first week in the house, I was playing Warzone on my Xbox when I heard this distinct sound come from the side of the basement where my room was. It was muffled by a wall, which led me to believe it came from my room. I went to quickly check inside my room, and it was empty. I hurried back to my game so that I wouldn't die, but to best describe the noise I heard, it sounded like a heavy glass object being placed on a table or something. I figured it probably came from upstairs. Literally the next night, I woke to some weird, muffled thumps. I couldn't tell if it was above my room or to the side of my room. I took my phone again and went to the air vents, but once again, even with the light, I couldn't see anything in there. I was starting to worry a small animal might be in the vents or living inside the walls. I brought it to my dad's attention, who told me to let him know if it persisted, and he told me to try to record the sounds if possible. So a few nights later, I woke up at 4 in the morning feeling extremely thirsty. My trusty bedside water bottle was empty that night, so I had to go upstairs to get a refill. On my way back downstairs from the kitchen after refilling the bottle, I stopped mid-staircase in the dark, thinking I heard something from the basement. "Andy?" I said very quietly, wondering if my brother was hiding down there. I whipped out my phone to use the flashlight again as I finished my descent down the stairs. I had a quick look around the basement just for peace of mind, and when I found it was clear, I went back to my room to hit the hay. As I placed my water bottle on the ledge above my bed, something in my gut told me to just look at that little vent in the wall one more time.
So I shined the light in that direction, and even though it was only for like half a second, I knew what I saw. There was someone looking through the holes in the vent for just a brief moment. I saw their eyes clear as day, but they moved away just as the light revealed them. What did I do? You probably hope I ran to the vent to get a look inside and see who was in there. But no. Instead, I screamed like a girl as I ran all the way back upstairs, yelling for my dad like a child. My whole family came down the stairs to my room. I brought them to the vent in my room and shined the light in it again. My dad took a look, and of course there was no one in sight now. I'm not even lying when I say my mom and dad told me the cliche I was seeing things because I hadn't gotten enough sleep and I was tired. I didn't buy it. I wasn't sleeping there that night. I slept in the living room and locked the basement door that night. The basement door only has a lock on it because we have an outdoor entrance to the basement, so it serves as an extra small layer of security from break-ins, I guess. Well, the next day, when I went down to the basement, I made a shocking discovery. There was some kind of secret door in the wall that was left open. I immediately called my dad down, and we went inside of it together. There was a blanket on the floor of this little hidden room, along with a small wooden stool-like thing. And if you walk down this ever-so-tiny corridor, you'd come to the vent that peers into my room. This discovery would otherwise be cool, if it didn't lead to the realization that someone has been living in this room, possibly raiding our kitchen, and possibly watching me in my room as I slept. I think when the person living in the room heard the commotion I made the night before, they figured it was time to bail. I just still fear that they may come back. It's April 2020 as I write this, stuck in quarantine. I live in a duplex house. It's one story, but it's divided into two sections. Each side has 2 bedrooms and a kitchen, with each having its own front door. Inside the house, there's a door separating the 2 sections, and it's locked by the other side. The landlord, Jose, lives on the other side, and he has the lock switch on his side of the door. Obviously, that's not exactly a situation I've been entirely comfortable with. So I took it upon myself to install some camera I bought on Amazon. It connects to my phone to alert me when motion is detected, and I aimed it right at that door. But did I ever expect to actually get any kind of notification from that app? No. That's why when I got a notification about movement on the camera, I freaked out. I opened the app and saw in the very laggy, low frame rate video that the door connecting the 2 sides of the house was open. I was literally sitting in my car in a parking lot, heart racing, waiting. A few minutes later, I saw Jose walking through the doorway, and a few seconds later, shutting the door behind him. I was supposed to go shopping, but instead I raced home to check my apartment. But as far as I could tell, nothing was touched. I didn't know whether to confront him or see if it persisted, but the curiosity just ate away at me that night. I knocked on his front door and told him about my camera, and that I knew he entered my apartment. He admitted it right away, but he had a reason. He said he smelt a burning smell that he thought was coming from my side of the house, and he knew I wasn't home, so he had to check if I left the oven on. Given that I couldn't find anything stolen, I had to just say, okay, thanks. I mean, realistically, it was a viable reason for him to come in, right? Still, that night while I was in bed, I wasn't happy about him just coming into my side of the house. I mean, that's against the law, isn't it? Given that we're both always home now makes the situation a little more tense. A few days later, I was up really late on a Zoom call with my friends when I got that dreaded notification on my phone that there was movement. I closed my laptop for like a second to go outside my room. All of my lights were off out there, obviously. It was like 3 a.m. I was in the living room, and I saw Jose standing in the corner. He had something in his hand that I couldn't see, but he was surely looking at me. I could only see him because the light from my bedroom came out to the living room slightly. He started walking to me like a zombie. I told him to chill out as I backed away into my room. When I saw him still approaching me with this lifeless posture, I slammed the door shut and locked it. He started to pound on the door with some blunt object and tried the doorknob. I yelled at him to stop before I called the police. And just like that, he stopped, and a few seconds later, I heard the door separating the apartment slam shut. I peeped into the outside. He appeared to be gone. I got the police on the phone and had them come to the house. We got Jose to come to my side of the house. He claimed he didn't remember a thing, and as the four of us watched the footage on my phone of him entering my side of the apartment, he had this look of fear and remorse. That's when he claimed he has a sleepwalking problem that's gotten worse recently, and he's on a bunch of medications. The police asked me if I wanted to press charges. I looked at Jose and said no. However, as soon as the police left, I barricaded that door with my dresser and started looking for new apartments. I haven't seen Jose since, and I'm not staying here much longer. I don't think I believe his sleepwalking story. It truly seemed he was trying to hurt me that night. Quarantining and social distancing has had my friends and I going crazy. So to spice things up, we wanted to explore the abandoned farmhouse down the road. It was my friends Luke, Kyle, and I. Luke drove us. It was only a 10-minute drive. We pulled up this hilly road onto this enclosed property where this once-occupied farm sits. Most people in the area have passed by this place at least once and are aware of its abandonment. Breaking in was easy. We just broke a window on the ground level and hopped in through there. The place was so old we saw dust particles floating everywhere in the light beams from our flashlights. The most noteworthy things we noticed were the lack of furniture and extremely creaky floors. Even though the place was known to be abandoned, we still expected at least some things left behind. However, it seemed people had already looted the place out. The three of us branched off a bit to different sections of the house to explore, and within a minute, Kyle came tiptoeing back to us and whispered that he heard someone or something in another room. I whispered where, and he pointed. He refused to go over there, while Luke and I just quietly laughed, thinking he was either being a pussy or trying to freak us out. Not gonna lie, given the setting, that dark, quiet old farmhouse surrounded by woods in the dead of night, his claims did give me goosebumps. Luke and I still proceeded quietly to the room that he was pointing at. It was impossible not to make at least a little creaking on those terrible rotting wood floorboards. Then we discovered that the little room contained a two-way staircase, one going upstairs, another going to the basement. But when I approached the basement staircase, my goosebumps came back when I realized most, if not all, of the stairs had collapsed, and at this point, it was more so just a hole in the floor. Luke dared me to look down into the basement. I was going to, then I for sure heard a noise come from down there. It was this creaking sound that would repeat every couple seconds. I turned to Luke and whispered, "Do you hear that?" He nodded his head and whispered back to go look down there. I took a deep breath and said, "To hell with it, I'll do it." I crept to the disturbing-looking hole in the floor and shined my flashlight into the darkness below. At first I didn't see anything except a concrete floor in the basement and small piles of rotted wood. But then I got on my knees to get a deeper look in the basement. And that's when we heard,
Hello?
My hand just jerked to the right where I heard the voice, and I saw an old woman with long gray hair in a rocking chair. She was looking at me with this lifeless smile. It had this hint of malice to it. I fell backwards and dropped my flashlight. I yelled at the top of my lungs to run to my friends. Kyle already left the house and was waiting in the car. Luke and I then got to the car, and I was yelling at him the whole time to hurry up. Once we exited the property, I felt a lot better. Luke heard the voice too. He didn't see what I saw, though. It was bizarre. It was surreal. It was terrifying. It didn't make sense. Why was she down there? How did she get down there when all the stairs had collapsed? What else was down there? All these unanswered questions are made creepier when you remember that farm has been abandoned for years.